911. Do you need police, fire, medical?
My daughter's dead. She just had to go in there.
Sir, did she hang herself?
No, she didn't hang herself, but
how old is she?
Around her. She's 11 years old.
On November 29th, 2001, 12-year-old Amanda Cope was found strangled to death in her own bed in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Sadly, her own father, Billy Cope, was the one to find her. He immediately went into a state of shock. However, when the police arrived to investigate, they found a very suspicious scene. Who could have done such a thing to a sweet 12-year-old child? And who was the police's main suspect in the case?
Is she breathing?
Oh, no, she's dead.
She's
cold as a cucumber. And
okay, you don't want to try to CPR or anything on her?
no, ma'am, she's dead. I mean, her mouth is completely shut. She's ice cold.
Okay, when was the last time you saw her live, sir?
About 2 o'clock this morning.
About 2 o'clock this morning. Has she been
1 o'clock this morning.
Has she been sick or anything?
No, ma'am. The thing was just wrapped around her neck.
Was it her bed clothing or her sheet?
It was her blanket. She just had a blanket laying there, and she rolled over and it wrapped around her neck. It's the green thing on the blanket. She laid on the green blanket with a green blanket, and it had a string wrapped around it. I mean, I gotta call my wife.
Okay. Okay, what kind of house do you live in, sir? What color is your house?
It's white. But she's gone on to be with the Lord, but she was a Christian. Please, I really
okay. All right, sir.
I have my light on.
All right, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That chilling recording you just heard was the 911 call that 37-year-old Billy Cope made when he found his daughter Amanda dead in her bedroom. In the early hours of November 29th, 2001, in Rock Hill, South Carolina, Billy Cope woke up with a start at around 3 a.m. and immediately knew something was wrong in his house. The hall light was on, and he distinctly remembered turning it off before going to bed. His wife, Mary Sue, was out at her overnight job where she cleaned offices, so it was just him and his 3 girls, Amanda, Jessica, and Kyla, at home. Amanda was the oldest at 12 years old, while Jessica and Kyla were 11 and 7 respectively. A devoutly Christian family, they'd missed the Wednesday church service they usually attended that night because Jessica was struggling with her math homework and needed some extra help to complete her assignment. Amanda, always the caring older sister, had offered to help her, and Billy agreed to let the 2 girls stay up as long as was needed to complete the work. The youngest daughter, Kyla, had gone to bed at 9 p.m., but Billy stayed up with the older 2 sisters till 1 a.m., helping them finish their schoolwork. Afterwards, they all headed to bed to get some much-needed rest, and Billy had turned on his CPAP breathing machine that he used to keep his sleep apnea at bay before drifting to sleep. Strangely, just 2 hours later, he was awoken by something. Still half asleep, Billy went to check on his daughters. Amanda's door was shut, and he concluded that perhaps she was the one who turned on the hall light. Maybe she'd gotten up in the middle of the night for a drink of water. The other bedroom door was open, and he saw his 2 younger girls fast asleep in their beds. With his mind more at ease, he returned to his bed, put his breathing machine back on, and quickly fell back to sleep. The following morning at 6 a.m., Billy was awoken by the blaring of his alarm clock. He later stated that during those intermittent hours of sleep, he dreamed about the rapture. In his dream, Jesus had returned to take his followers home. He explained that in his dream, he saw Amanda being taken and him being left behind, with her saying the words, "Bye, Daddy," to him. Still feeling jarred from his intense dream, he quickly left his bed to check on his daughters. He was overwhelmed with relief when he saw his 2 younger girls still sleeping peacefully in their beds. But his comfort was short-lived. As he tried to open Amanda's door, it was caught on the open closet door behind it. After using force to get through the door, he witnessed an unbearable sight. Amanda's body was lying limp on her bed. When he went to touch her, she was ice cold, and he knew that his nightmare had come true. He then covered her and, still in a state of shock, dialed 911. Within minutes, paramedics from the fire department arrived at the scene, but their life-saving gear was useless. Amanda was, indeed, gone. Jason Dillon from the Rock Hill Fire Department asked Billy what he thought had happened, and Billy told him that he thought she may have choked on her blanket as she had a history of rolling in her sleep. Detectives arrived soon after and secured the house as an active crime scene and began an investigation. The detectives were immediately suspicious of Billy's reaction to his daughter's death. His calm demeanor seemed unnatural, and he did not display much emotion at all. Soon, dozens of investigators filled the tiny house looking for clues, but the house was a mess, with the family's belongings cluttering every room. There were clothes piled on every surface, dishes overflowing out of the sinks, cockroaches scurrying into the corners. In the midst of this, Amanda's body lay fully clothed on her bed, surrounded by her books and recent school pictures that she'd just gotten back from the photographer. When the body was examined, investigators found that she'd been beaten and strangled to death after being assaulted. There were bruises on her body and physical evidence was found on her clothes. The evidence was collected in the hopes that it could be used in identifying the killer. While processing the house for clues, police found another oddity. After examining all the doors and the windows, they realized that there were no signs of forced entry into the home. All the entrances were locked from the inside. This indicated to investigators that the killer likely came from within the house. The detectives spoke to Billy and asked him how he thought Amanda had died. Billy claimed that she may have been strangled by her blanket in her sleep, which was not in line with the evidence at the crime scene. Detectives knew they needed to dig deeper. Upon looking into his background, they learned that 2 years prior, he and his wife had both pleaded guilty to neglecting the proper care of their children. This was the final piece of information that they needed. Along with his emotionless reaction to her death, his bizarre explanation of how she died, and the fact that there were no signs of forced entry into the house, it seemed to the police that Billy was clearly the prime suspect in their case. They immediately took him downtown to the police station for more intense questioning. Over the next few days, detectives grilled Billy mercilessly. He faced over 17 hours of interrogation over the next 4 days. On the first day of interrogation, the 29th of November 2001, the same day of the murder, Billy was questioned for 3.5 hours by detectives. As a result of this initial questioning, detectives had no doubt that he had committed the terrible crime. All they needed from him was a confession. But on that first day, Billy insisted that he was innocent again and again, over 650 times according to the recordings of the interrogations. He told the police that he loved his daughters, and there was no way he would have ever hurt Amanda. He claimed that the only reason he didn't hear anything that night was because the machine he used for his sleep apnea was very loud and it drowned out any outside noise. This seemed unlikely to the investigators, who continued to probe Billy to see if they could get a confession out of him. However, Billy would not admit to the crime. They tried to use his faith against him, saying he'd burn in hell for what he did. They also tried to tell him once the physical evidence they had collected came back as a match to him, he'd have nowhere to hide. Yet, no matter what they said, Billy continued to deny any involvement in the murder of his daughter. Finally, as they entered the 4th hour of questioning on the second day, Billy asked for a polygraph or lie detector test, believing it would be what finally convinced them of his innocence. Unfortunately, this would be where it all began to unravel for Billy. Not long after beginning his polygraph, the individual conducting the test slammed his hand down on the table and told the detectives that they had enough to end the test. He looked Billy in the eye and told him he'd failed the test. Billy was devastated. Following these results, detectives pressed Billy further, wanting to know why he'd done this terrible thing to his daughter. Slowly, Billy began to talk. Billy eventually confessed, yet he seemed unsure of his own statements. The first confession ended with him signing a written statement of what he'd done, admitting to killing his own daughter. But that would not be all. By the end of the 4th day of the interrogation, Billy had given a total of 4 different confessions to the police, and none of them matched each other or aligned with the evidence at the crime scene. In one, Amanda was beaten with a broom, but this was not mentioned in any of his other confessions. Some confessions included a dream, yet in other statements the dream was excluded, or a very different version of the dream was told. None of the details from each individual confession lined up with one another. Regardless of this, detectives accepted them as the truth, even though they believed Billy to be severely mentally disturbed. The fourth and final confession was a video reenactment where the police took him back to his house and taped him as he went over what he did the night of the murder. Eventually, due to his many confessions, Billy was charged as the sole perpetrator in the murder of his daughter. However, after these long interrogations, Billy retracted all of his confessions and again protested his innocence in court. Nonetheless, the damage was done, and Billy was sent to prison with no bond or any form of bail. It seemed like the case was done and dusted. A year had passed since the murder. Billy had confessed to the crime, and many people, even those who knew him, were now convinced that he was indeed guilty. But Billy himself was now once again professing his innocence. Phil Beatty, a private attorney from Rock Hill, was now charged to fight this case in court for him. Phil admits that the first time he met Billy, he thought he was guilty. His strategy for the case was to try and get Billy the best plea deal possible and just put the case to rest. However, after speaking to Billy about the process of his interrogation in the initial days after the murder, Beatty was disturbed by what he'd heard. When his court-assigned public defender, B.J. Barrowclough, had arrived at the police station, the police did not allow him to the interrogation room to see Billy, a clear violation of his rights. They produced a note that Billy had allegedly signed, which stated that he did not want to see his attorney at that time. When Barrowclough argued that they could have coerced him into signing this note, they simply refused to let him ask his client himself. It was only after this fourth confession that his defense attorney, B.J. Barrowclough, was allowed to see him. When he asked Billy why he'd signed the confession, Billy replied that the police had told him he'd get the death penalty if he didn't sign it. Beatty was shocked at the clear violation of Billy's rights. However, since the confessions had been written and signed, he was unsure if this information would aid in his case. In an unexpected turn of events, in late 2002, Beatty got a call from the prosecutor's office asking for a meeting. Believing this was in regards to a deal for his client, he agreed to meet with them, but he could never have expected what they were about to tell him. As they sat him down, they explained to him that the DNA found on Amanda's body had finally been processed, and, to the surprise of everyone, the DNA was not Billy's. Beatty was shocked, but also happy to hear this news, because it now meant that his client was innocent and he had a real chance to win this case. But what they would tell him next would shock him even more. He was told that the police had been aware within a few weeks of the murder that the DNA was not a match to Billy, but had kept this information to themselves for over a year. This infuriated Beatty to no end. He could not believe such a grievous miscarriage of justice had been carried out, and that no one had thought this information was important enough to inform Billy's lawyers about it before this time. But then he stopped and asked why they decided to tell him this information now, after all these months, if they'd known it was not Billy's DNA all that time ago. And that is when the final piece of information was revealed to him. He was told that the reason he was being told all of this now was that the police had found a match to the DNA in the system, and they knew whose it was. It belonged to a man named James Sanders. There's not much information known about James Sanders' past, where he came from, or what he was doing prior to 2001. All that's known is he was a career criminal who had committed a variety of crimes prior to this horrific one. He'd been released from prison and moved into the same neighborhood as the Copes only about 2 weeks prior to him killing Amanda. He lived in a house only 2 blocks away from where Billy and his family lived. There's no evidence present that the two men knew each other, and they certainly would have made an unusual pair. Billy Cope was, in the words of his lawyer, a socially isolated 385-pound white man. He was also a devout Christian and aspiring preacher. James Sanders, on the other hand, was an African-American career criminal and drug addict who'd recently gotten out of prison. In the 6 weeks following Amanda's murder in November 2001, Sanders committed or attempted to commit 4 more sexual assaults in the neighborhood. Now that his attorneys knew there was another man whose DNA had been found at the scene of the crime, they realized that Billy was factually innocent. They then questioned him seriously as to why he had provided false confessions to the police when he was interrogated right after the murder occurred. Billy told his lawyers that when he was questioned by the police in the hours following the murder, he had been sure of his innocence. But he'd also been in a state of shock, having just lost his daughter in such a traumatic manner. Due to this, he may have appeared emotionless to them. He also told them that he'd provided false confessions in an effort to confuse the police. He believed that his confessions would not carry any weight unless police were able to prove them, and he didn't believe the evidence would point to any of his confessions being legitimate. However, in this matter, he was wrong, as the police were willing to accept his confessions, even though none of them matched each other, or indeed the evidence found at the scene. Despite Sanders being identified as being present the night that Amanda was killed, Billy was still charged with the crime. The case went to trial in 2004, and the trial was centered around both sides trying to prove what actually had taken place the night of the murder. While Billy's lawyers argued that Billy was not involved in his daughter's death in any manner, the prosecutors found a simple explanation for both Billy's confessions and the new DNA evidence that had been found. They said that the only logical explanation was that both men were in on it and had carried out the crime together. The prosecutors alleged that this is why there were no signs of forced entry into the house, as Billy had let Sanders in and then locked up again once he'd left. Cope's attorneys said prosecutors were just trying to present the evidence in this manner so they could cover up their inappropriate interrogation tactics. They argued that Cope had mental issues and was so devastated by his daughter's death that detectives were able to manipulate him into confessing to a crime he did not commit. The defense was also not allowed to present crucial evidence to the jury due to Judge John C. Hayes III not allowing it on the grounds of it leading the jury to a logical fallacy. The evidence that was excluded was the fact that in the 4 sexual assaults that Sanders had committed or attempted in the weeks following Amanda's murder, there was never any sign of forced entry. It certainly appears that Sanders was a master at breaking and entering and left no evidence for even the most seasoned of detectives to find. Another key piece of evidence the defense lawyers were not allowed to present to the jury was the testimony from a jailhouse informant who claimed he had overheard Sanders say he had raped and killed a little girl in Rock Hill. These sorts of testimonies are often allowed by courts when they help prosecutors, but in this case, when it could have helped the defendant, it was not allowed. While it may seem clear to you that Billy was not involved in his daughter's death at all, this is not how the jury ended up seeing it. Both Sanders and Billy were convicted and were charged with conspiracy, which means they collaborated with each other to commit the crime. They were each given life sentences without the chance of parole in 2004. In April 2009, the verdict was appealed, and a 3-judge panel from the South Carolina Court of Appeals reversed the conspiracy conviction, ruling that there was no evidence that Cope and Sanders knew each other. However, the South Carolina Attorney General appealed this decision soon after, and the decision was overturned. In 2013, the state Supreme Court upheld Cope's conviction, and the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear his case. Despite all the evidence seemingly pointing towards Billy's innocent, he remained behind bars. On February 9, 2017, at the age of 53, Billy Cope died of natural causes in state custody. He never got to see the outside of a jail cell after being charged with the murder of his own daughter. Whether or not he was actually guilty, we leave for you to decide. Bollywood glitz and glamour. Sridevi Yangar Ayappan, also known professionally and publicly as Sridevi, had been in Dubai, UAE to attend her nephew's wedding. The 54-year-old diva was accompanied by her husband Boney Kapoor and youngest daughter Khushi Kapoor. While Boney and Khushi left Dubai the day after the wedding, Sridevi decided to extend her stay and convert this eventful journey into a relaxing vacation. In a shocking turn of events, when everyone thought Sridevi was enjoying her getaway, her lifeless body was found submerged underwater in the bathtub of her hotel room on February 24, 2018.
Bollywood actor Sridevi's unexpected death in Dubai shook millions of fans across the globe.
So what happened with Sridevi in the bathroom that night? Was it simply an accident, or was there a mystery behind this tragic incident? Dubai is a city situated within the United Arab Emirates. The city is most renowned for its towering skyscrapers, such as the iconic Burj Khalifa, which symbolizes remarkable human achievement. But that's not all Dubai has to offer. The city is lined with picture-perfect beaches where the sun lovingly caresses the sand and provides some of the most heavenly views one could ever imagine. When it comes to safety, Dubai actually ranks quite high on the list. With a low crime rate index of 16.27 and the highest safety index of 83.73 out of 100. While this may make Dubai a great option for a city to settle in, it doesn't mean that the city's free from all danger. Which brings us to the mysterious case of Sridevi. In the quaint village of Minampadi near Sivakasi in present-day Tamil Nadu, India, Sri Amma Yangar Ayappan came into the world on August 13, 1963. Her parents Ayappan and Rajeswari Yangar played pivotal roles in shaping her upbringing. Shri's father was a lawyer who hailed from Sivakasi, Tamil Nadu, and Shri's mother, who was originally from Tirupati, Andhra Pradesh, took care of the household. Shri, as she was lovingly called, embraced Telugu as her mother tongue, seamlessly weaving it with her fluent command of Tamil. Growing up, she shared her childhood with her younger sister, Srilatha Yangar. As much as they fought each other as children, the two sisters were inseparable. Satish and Suryakala were Shri's half-siblings who stemmed from her father's and mother's previous marriages, respectively. Shri's journey in the world of cinema unfolded when she took her first steps as a child artist in the 1967 Tamil film Kandan Karunai at the tender age of 4. Her talent continued to bloom, and she got herself the lead role in a mythological Tamil film in 1969, where she showcased her remarkable acting skills even as a young performer. As she entered the captivating realm of acting, ascending to greater heights, she decided to spice things up a bit and adopted a stage name that transcended mere letters. She called herself Sridevi. The specific age or stage of her career when she chose this name remains unclear. However, what is clear is that she embraced the name upon entering the film industry. Sridevi's transition into on-screen adulthood occurred in 1976 when she was only 13. As challenging as it was for teenage Sridevi to play an adult in the Tamil films, her grace and charm earned her a special spot in the film industry. This marked the beginning of Sridevi's evolution into a prominent leading lady of South Indian cinema. Across her diverse career in the following years, Shri made her mark as an actress proficient in Telugu, Tamil, Hindi, Malayalam, and Kannada language films. Her mesmerizing dance became a cultural phenomenon, with many praising Sridevi's bejeweled outfits and headgear for stealing the show. Following this success, she continued to achieve milestones in Bollywood, performing her best and showcasing her acting skills. Filmfare magazine celebrated Sridevi's success and stardom by declaring her the best female star in Bollywood on their cover. Sridevi's status as one of the leading actresses in Bollywood was solidifying day by day. Sridevi's journey to superstardom reached new heights with her portrayal of a quirky crime journalist in the science fiction film Mr. India, opposite another renowned Bollywood figure, Anil Kapoor, in 1987. Many agreed that Sridevi was a complete show-stealer in her films. Sridevi's mobile facial expressions and uninhibited presence in front of the camera garnered recognition, establishing her as a powerhouse in the industry. Sridevi's infectious laughter and her ability to look distinctly tearful when the scene demanded added a touch of perfection to all her performances. In fact, she had the uncanny ability to overshadow her co-stars, making them seem more like sidekicks in the film. From that point onward, she showcased her versatility in each film, expanding her repertoire with diverse roles. Amidst Sridevi's flourishing career, when her father passed away due to a heart attack while she was in the middle of shooting for another film. Her journey in Bollywood continued with a string of successful movies, cementing her position as a formidable force in the industry. Inevitably, Sridevi came to be known as the first female superstar of Indian cinema. From 1985 to 1993, Sridevi held the coveted title of being the highest-paid actress in India. In the midst of the production of Jurassic Park between 1992 and 1993, the renowned Hollywood director and producer Steven Spielberg extended an offer to Sridevi for a small role in the film. Despite the honor and fame associated with the opportunity, Sridevi, upon careful consideration of the role's significance, declined the offer. Behind the glamorous life of a heroine with enchanting magical eyes and stunning beauty was an inherently reserved woman who was often mistaken as being arrogant. But the reality was that Sridevi was genuinely shy. Commencing her acting journey at the tender age of 4, she missed out on the typical experience of formal education and interactions with peers her age. This early exposure to the industry shaped her aversion to crowds and noise, and she resorted to maintaining a calm and introverted demeanor off the camera. Consequently, throughout the period spanning from 1972 to 1994, when Sridevi was actively involved in film shooting, she always had the company of her mother, Rajeswari, or her sister, Srilatha, on the sets. However, Sridevi never complained about this. She was always grateful for what she had. In 1996, Boney Kapoor, who was a prominent film producer from the illustrious Bollywood lineage, the Kapoor family, tied the knot with Sridevi, and the newly married couple embarked on a whole new journey. However, this union between Boney and Sridevi raised many eyebrows and was considered quite a scandal since Boney had divorced his first wife, Moneshwari Kapoor, earlier in 1996. People wondered whether Sridevi and Boney had been having an affair since the gap between Boney's 2 marriages was notably less. With time, things came to rest, and the couple soon welcomed Janvi, their first daughter, into the world in 1997. Unfortunately, around the same period of time, Sridevi's mother faced complications stemming from a surgery she'd undergone in 1995 to treat a brain tumor. During the initial surgery, the neurosurgeon had made an error where he'd operated on the wrong side of her mother's brain, causing the destruction of vital tissues associated with vision and recent memory. Sridevi's mother couldn't recover from the damage and eventually passed away later in 1997. Following her mother's demise, Sridevi took a hiatus from the film industry and later welcomed another daughter, Kushi, in the year 2000. After a 15-year absence from the silver screen, Sridevi made a cinematic comeback that would soon go down in Bollywood history. This triumphant return wasn't just a personal victory. It etched Sridevi's name as the only actress in Bollywood to stage a successful comeback as a leading lady after marriage and a prolonged break from the film industry. Encouraged by the success, Sridevi ventured into her 300th film, a psychological thriller, in 2017. The journey of her comeback, however, took an unexpected turn when she signed up for a 2019 period romantic drama, only to have fate intervene before she could step into that role. On February 20th, 2018, Sridevi, accompanied by Boney and their youngest daughter Kushi, flew to Al Jazeera Al Hamra in Ras Al Khaimah, United Arab Emirates, to join the joyous celebration of her nephew Mohit Marwa's wedding. Sridevi's elder daughter Janvi unfortunately couldn't join due to her professional commitments. As the festivities unfolded, Kushi and Boney departed on February 22, 2018, with Boney heading to a meeting in Lucknow, back in India. Sridevi and Janvi loved to shop together, but since Janvi couldn't join her mother this time, she instead sent her a carefully prepared shopping list as her 21st birthday was around. Sridevi had the list stored in her cell phone and had planned to go on a shopping spree on February 21, 2018. Unfortunately, she had to cancel those plans as she realized that she'd left her cell phone behind in Ras Al Khaimah. So with that, she then decided to linger a bit longer and make the most out of her time by extending her stay in Dubai, UAE, and make the most of her getaway. Not letting this bother her, Sridevi embraced the unexpected leisure time, spending the day relaxing in her hotel room. On the 22nd, she continued the laid-back approach, enjoying the company of a friend and engaging in fun conversations. A couple of days went by and Sridevi phoned Boney, telling him how much she missed him. Boney recounted the conversation, saying, "When she told me, 'Papa,' that's how she addressed him, 'I'm missing you,' I also told her that I was missing her a lot." Little did Sridevi know that Boney had already planned a surprise visit. Boney set the plan into motion on the morning of February 24th, 2018. He booked a 3:30 p.m. flight on that same day to Dubai. While he was seated in the lounge area of the international airport in Bombay, he received a call from Sridevi. Wanting to maintain the element of surprise, he made up a story about being engaged in a meeting for the next few hours and told her that his phone might be switched off. He assured her not to worry and promised to call her back as soon as he was free. The grand scheme was to catch her off guard with a surprise visit to her room at the Jumeirah Emirates Tower Hotel in Dubai, where Sridevi had been staying for the last few days. As planned, Boney arrived at the Jumeirah Emirates Towers Hotel at around 6:20 in the evening on Saturday, February 24th, 2018. While he was busy with the check-in formalities and securing a duplicate key to Sridevi's room, he couldn't contain his excitement about surprising her. In the midst of this anticipation, he requested the bellboy to delay delivering his bag to the room. Eager to catch Sridevi completely off guard, he knocked on the door of room number 2201 where Sridevi was lodged. As Sridevi opened the door and found Boney standing on the other side, she jumped up in joy. After an emotional reunion, the couple indulged in a lively chat for nearly half an hour, after which Boney excused himself to freshen up. Boney was overjoyed to see Sridevi and was in the mood for a romantic dinner. He asked Sridevi to postpone the planned shopping spree to the next day so they could instead enjoy a nice meal over drinks. Sridevi agreed and was all in for the plan. Although Boney was convinced that his plan worked, he somehow had a hunch that Sridevi knew about his surprise plans, but decided to play along. While Boney waited in the living room watching TV, Sridevi went to the bathroom to take a bath and get dressed. After 15 or 20 minutes, at approximately 7 p.m., Boney realized that they were running late and called out to her. But there was no response. He walked up to the bathroom and called out to her again. Growing concerned, Boney knocked on the bathroom door, repeatedly calling out Sridevi's name and escalating into a state of panic. Unable to get any response, Boney opened the door since it had not been bolted from the inside. The tragic incident unfolded as he discovered Sridevi fully immersed in water from head to toe inside the bathtub. Boney was in deep shock. He couldn't believe what was in front of his eyes. He pulled himself together and called the hotel staff and then the Dubai Police Department. At first glance, the circumstances remained unclear to the detectives, as there wasn't a single drop of water outside the tub, indicating no movement of her legs or arms or any sign of a struggle. Sridevi was officially declared dead later that evening on February 24th, 2018. The narrative took an unexpected turn with the release of the forensic report by Dubai officials. In a shocking revelation, it was disclosed that the beloved actress Sridevi met her demise through accidental drowning in the confines of her hotel bathtub. The complexities of the investigation deepened as the toxicology report later unveiled traces of alcohol in Sridevi's bloodstream and the presence of water in her lungs. This painted a rather dark picture of the circumstances surrounding Sridevi's untimely departure. The final chapter of this sorrowful saga unfolded on the 28th of February 2018 at the Ville Parle Seva Samaj crematorium in Mumbai. The rituals of farewell were led by Sridevi's grieving husband, Boney Kapoor, who performed the last rites. Sridevi's departure was marked with state honors, a reverent gun salute, and the searing flame of her pyre, ignited by the one who knew her best, her husband. On March 3, 2018, Boney Kapoor and his two daughters, Janvi and Kushi, traveled to Tamil Nadu along with Sridevi's ashes. The final immersion took place in the sea off the coast of Rameswaram. Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday evening, the heart of Chennai resonated with a prayer meeting on March 11, 2018, organized by Sridevi's grieving family. The event, which was out of bounds for the media, became a sacred space where actors from Bollywood played homage to the late actress, their collective grief echoing through the silent corridors of remembrance. So, a Bollywood diva accidentally ended up drowning in her hotel bathtub, and everyone was in the clear? Was that all? Absolutely not. Sridevi might have been in the later years of her life, but she was fit as a fiddle. The world was just not convinced that she died due to accidental drowning. Some were even suspicious about the credibility of the released document which stated Sridevi's death as accidental drowning, since it misspelt the term drowning. What was the truth behind Sridevi's death? Why was it being hidden? Sridevi's fans, among with other Bollywood enthusiasts, believed there was more to the story and someone's dirty deeds had been swept under the rug. That was when some very thought-provoking theories started coming up. The most controversial theory came to light when filmmaker Sunil Singh came forward with his fresh claims. Sunil claimed Sridevi's death to be a murder, but he was the only one who had actually done some fruitful research to back up his claims. What made Sunil's theory create headlines was the fact that he straight up accused Boney Kapoor of murdering Sridevi. Sunil had done some digging and uncovered information on Boney, which brought to light some intriguing factors about his financial condition. Sunil Singh's lawyer asserted that Boney Kapoor, Sridevi's husband, was grappling with a significant financial downturn. Notably, Boney's recent cinematic works had faced challenges at the box office. His first major success came out in 2005, a film called No Entry, which featured Salman Khan. In 2009, he experienced success once again with the release of the film Wanted, also in collaboration with Salman Khan. Having Salman Khan in a movie somehow managed decent box office success. Sadly, that movie became his last major hit. This was because the once tight bond between Boney Kapoor and Salman Khan began to shred apart after 2010. The reason behind this rift was the romantic involvement of Boney Kapoor's son with Salman Khan's sister-in-law. There were rumors that, being aware of the potential repercussions on his brother's marriage, Salman gave Boney Kapoor a stern warning. He urged him to keep his son away from his sister-in-law to prevent any harm to the bond they shared. However, Salman's brother and sister-in-law ended up getting divorced. The fallout from this event cast a shadow over the once close relationship between Salman Khan and Boney Kapoor, and soon, without the support of his biggest Bollywood star, Boney's career in the film industry went down the drain. Boney Kapoor found himself selling his properties in an attempt to make ends meet, while also struggling to maintain a luxurious status in the industry. Amidst these tensions, speculations emerged, suggesting that Boney Kapoor may have planned the tragic demise of his wife in Dubai as a desperate measure to pull himself and his family out of a severe financial crisis. But how would Sridevi's death help Boney with this financial crisis? That was what the public questioned. Luckily, what Sunil revealed next put all those questions to rest. With the information at hand, Sunil later entered a plea in the Supreme Court demanding a probe into Sridevi's death and presenting some more jaw-dropping revelations about Boney Kapoor's wicked schemes. In the legal proceedings, Sunil Singh's legal representative told the court about an insurance policy that existed in Sridevi's name in Oman. The policy was valued at 240 crore rupees, equivalent to $35 million. This revelation of the policy came as a shock to everyone and had them on the edge of their seats. According to the policy, there was a unique clause which specifically stated that the funds were claimable exclusively in the event of the actress's demise occurring in Dubai. While these claims made headlines and caught the attention of the public, the Supreme Court ultimately dismissed Sunil Singh's plea, stating that prior investigations conducted by authorities in the UAE had already looked at this angle and nothing suspicious was uncovered. The fact that no individual from Sridevi's family or her close social circles ever contradicted or refuted the existence of the substantial 240 crore rupees policy spewed more suspicion, but the issue was eventually laid to rest by the media. Amidst the whispers of doubt, retired ACP Ved Bhushan came up with his own theory. He too believed that the actress's death showed signs of a planned murder, and further claimed that officials falsely stated Sridevi's death as accidental drowning to hide the truth. However, he speculated that the notorious underworld figure Dawood Ibrahim might be involved in the murder mystery. Boney might or might not have a hand in it. Dawood Ibrahim had a strong influence over authorities in Dubai, and the hotel where Sridevi was found dead was said to be linked to him as well. Bhushan was determined to find out the truth. In a bid to confirm his theories, Bhushan reportedly stayed overnight in Jumeirah Emirates Towers, Dubai, the same hotel where Sridevi was staying at the time of her death. Bhushan was accompanied by his private investigation agency, who was helping put the pieces together. Armed with his suspicions and circumstantial links, Bhushan aimed to file an appeal in the Supreme Court to reopen the investigation into Sridevi's death, seeking a fresh examination of the circumstances surrounding the tragic event. Rishiraj Singh, the former Director General of Prisons and Correctional Services in Kerala, brought forth an intriguing perspective on the case as well. According to him, there was more to the mystery behind Sridevi's death than what was initially perceived. In an extensive column penned for the newspaper Kerala Kamudi, Rishiraj talked about the complexities of the case, asserting that there was foul play. Staying stern on those beliefs, Rishiraj contended that the actress was not a victim of accidental drowning, but rather a victim of murder. Recalling a conversation he earlier had with the renowned forensic expert, the late Dr. Umadathan, Rishiraj shed light on certain details that cast doubt on the drowning narrative. According to Rishiraj, Dr. Umadathan pointed out that the possibility of someone drowning in shallow water, regardless of alcohol consumption, was severely low. Dr. Umadathan was sure that the Dubai officials were hiding the truth behind Sridevi's death. According to his theory, Sridevi had been deliberately held underwater by another individual, submerging her head while also restraining both her legs. He was sure that the accidental drowning claim was just a cover-up. This revelation raised questions about the official account of Sridevi's demise and how it originally had been handled. While there's no response to these claims from either the Dubai Police Department or the Kapoor family, it certainly put them under scrutiny. With time, the number of people who believed these theories grew immensely, with hundreds demanding a reinvestigation into Sridevi's case. Sadly, no official response was ever received from the authorities. Another and the most convincing conspiracy that came to light was the one which claimed that Sridevi had died at least 1 or 2 days before the day Boni said he found her in the bathtub. Apparently, Sridevi had posted a picture through her Instagram account on February 22, 2018. This picture became her last social media post. So it was safe to assume that Sridevi was well and alive on February 22, 2018, unless someone else posted that picture using her phone or laptop. But there is no proof that Sridevi was alive on February 23, 2018 or February 24, 2018. Even in Dubai, Sridevi was a star and people knew who she was. If she had stepped outside her hotel on either of the 2 days in question, people would have seen her, recognized her, and would have clicked pictures or taken autographs. She was, after all, a celebrity. Even if she'd gone to a mall or even to her hotel balcony, people would have noticed, talked, and made video clips on their phones. Yet, no one came forward saying they saw Sridevi at any point on February 23rd or February 24th, 2018. This meant that if, at all, Sridevi was alive on those days, she had not left her hotel at all, which seemed quite odd. Additionally, the last time Sridevi was captured on camera was on the wedding day itself. Boni Kapoor claimed that he was the last person to see Sridevi alive before she entered the bathroom around 7 p.m. on February 24, 2018. However, many questioned the credibility of his statement and suggested a different narrative. According to them, there was a possibility that Sridevi might have succumbed to a drug overdose sometime between posting that picture on February 22nd and the time she was found dead in the bathtub on February 24, 2018. Evidently, her lifeless body may have been in the hotel room for quite some time before the hotel staff realized her prolonged absence and lack of food orders. According to the theory, the hotel staff, after entering the room and confirming Sridevi's demise, alerted Boni and chose to wait until his arrival before planning the next course of action. Upon receiving the distressing call, Boni Kapoor would have rushed to the scene, only to discover the tragic reality awaiting him. The controversy around a potential drug overdose would raise questions about Sridevi's character and leave her name tarnished for ages. If this cause of death were officially declared, Sridevi would forever be remembered as a drug user. The fear of public backlash and the urgency to prevent the leakage of such sensitive information might have made Boni come up with the story of accidental drowning as a cover-up. The revelation of Sridevi's purported drowning left her admirers in denial, giving rise to more and more conspiracy theories coming up throughout the years. And even though the circumstances surrounding her untimely demise continue to fuel speculation and discussion among her devoted fan base, Sridevi's family maintained a poised silence adding a layer of mystery to an already complex narrative. Amidst the whispers of fans and the echoes of friends and family, the news of her mysterious passing rippled through the corridors of the film industry. Many took to social media outlets where thousands of tributes poured in the wake of Sridevi's departure. In remembrance of Sridevi, Boney too made a post on his social media accounts, sharing his grief with the world. He said that Sridevi was the epitome of acting prowess to the world, but to him, she was more than just an icon. She was his love, his confidant, and the mother of his 2 daughters. Losing their mother was harsh for both Kushi and Janvi. Sridevi wasn't just a star for them, but their whole universe. In the Kapoor family, Sridevi was often referred to as the glue who held the family together. And now, when she wasn't around anymore, the Kapoors found themselves in a dark place, trying to put the tragic incident behind and move on. The film community and Sridevi's close family members gathered to pay their final respects at Celebration Sports Club in Lokhandwala and later at her somber funeral. The air hung heavy with grief as thousands of devoted fans poured into the streets, driven by an overwhelming desire to honor their beloved icon. In the middle of this mourning, the sheer magnitude of emotions overflowed, leading the police to employ stern measures to keep the crowd in control during the procession from Celebration Sports Complex to the crematorium. The crowd, a formidable force numbering over 7,000, stood as a testament to the profound impact Sridevi had on the hearts of her fans. Sridevi's funeral was one of a kind and ranked as the 4th largest gathering of mourners in India. In a rare and remarkable gesture, Sridevi was posthumously given full state honors, a privilege typically reserved for the highest levels of political leadership. This unprecedented recognition elevated her status among everyone who was a part of the Indian entertainment industry. While Boney and his family were still recovering from the loss, the excessive scrutiny he had to face due to multiple conspiracy theories made him break his silence. Being accused by the public of murdering his own wife, Boney decided to speak up and tell his side of the story. While Sridevi's fans suspected Boney of foul play in her death, the investigation that took place in Dubai right after the murder found him innocent. As Boney was the one who found Sridevi unconscious in the bathtub, he was taken to the Bur Dubai police station for an initial round of questioning.
Exclusive details from Dubai reports suggesting that Sridevi's husband Boney Kapoor was questioned by the Dubai police for around 16 to 18 hours, and after that questioning by the Dubai police, Boney Kapoor has been cleared. The mortal remains of Sridevi are expected to reach Mumbai today.
After he gave a statement, he was let go and permitted to return to his hotel room.
Sridevi was visiting Dubai to attend a family wedding with her husband Boney Kapoor and her younger daughter. But it was not long after the tragedy followed the celebration. The 54-year-old actor was found dead in her hotel room on Saturday, February 24th, around midnight.
Given the high-profile nature of the case, the news of Sridevi's passing quickly made its way to the public. Adnan Siddiqui, Sridevi's Pakistani co-actor from her final film, Mom, was one of the first few people to arrive at the Jumeirah Emirates Tower upon learning about the actress's demise on Saturday night. Adnan revealed that on the night of Sridevi's death, he received an unexpected call from a journalist around 11 p.m. That was how he got the shocking news of Sridevi's demise. Without hesitation, he tried calling Boney Kapoor over the phone, feeling an urgent need to be by his side. Rushing to the hotel, he entered a scene of investigation with the room surrounded by Dubai police officials. At the time, only Boney and Dubai officials were present at the scene, and Adnan was not initially allowed to go in. However, he wasn't going to leave without seeing Boney. He walked into the hotel lobby and waited for about an hour. As the atmosphere began to settle, Boney phoned Adnan and called him upstairs. In those private moments, Adnan witnessed Boney's raw emotions. Boney was crying uncontrollably with tears smeared across his face. Adnan tried to console him, but nothing worked. The suddenness of the tragic incident had Boney in distress. He couldn't even get a chance to say goodbye to his beloved wife.
If you don't have support at home, by at home I mean your wife, with that support you can fight anything. I was blessed.
Boney had to let it all out. Staying by Boney's side until the early hours of the morning, Adnan offered solace and support. As the night wore on, he gently encouraged Boney to rest, eventually bidding farewell before the sun came up that same morning. As the news of Sridevi's death spread like wildfire, her brother-in-law, Sanjay Kapoor, stepped forward to confirm the heartbreaking reality. Initially, he announced to the Indian media that the cause of her demise was a sudden cardiac arrest. However, the abruptness of her passing left fans and fellow Bollywood celebrities grappled by grief. On social media, an outpour of posts expressing sorrow and shock ensued, with many questioning the credibility of the news. They wondered whether the tragic news was true or whether it was just another instance of a death hoax. The unexpected nature of her death, especially for a seemingly healthy 54-year-old with no prior history of heart issues, fueled speculation and disbelief. Amidst the confusion, Sanjay Kapoor clarified that Sridevi's passing was indeed a result of a massive cardiac arrest, further affirming that she had no history of heart issues. Despite this clarification, various theories began to circulate on social media, with some linking her untimely death to alleged multiple cosmetic surgeries that she had undergone in the past years. The mysteries surrounding her death gave rise to a wave of discussions and speculations in the public eye. By the morning of Sunday, on February 25, 2018, Dubai police officials had already gathered at the crime scene. The investigation began around 2:30 in the afternoon. The case was transferred to the hands of Dubai Public Prosecution, adding an air of official scrutiny to the unfolding tragedy. On February 27, 2018, after days of intense police investigation, Sridevi's cause of death was determined as accidental drowning and the case was closed. On the night of that same day, Sridevi's lifeless body made a poignant journey back to her homeland, Mumbai, India. Her husband, Boney, accompanied by Sridevi's stepson, Arjun Kapoor, arranged for a private jet for the journey, graciously provided by Anil Ambani, who was one of India's leading business leaders. The wings of the aircraft carried not just her body, but the weight of a nation's grief and love. The airport gates welcomed her arrival around 9:30 p.m., while many stood behind the barricades, coming to terms with the reality of this tragedy. In an interview with New Indian, which took place sometime in February 2023, Boney Kapoor opened up about Sridevi's death for the first time since her death in 2018. He revealed that Sridevi had been on a crash diet and added that she often used to starve herself in order to look good. Sridevi wanted to make sure that she was in shape to play roles of her choice on screen. Boney also shared some sensitive information, stating that Sridevi had blacked out on multiple occasions previously.
Indian producer Boney Kapoor has finally opened up about the tragic death of his wife and late actor Sridevi. Kapoor revealed that the actor was on a diet at the time of her death. He added that she used to starve to make herself look good on screen. According to Kapoor, she often experienced blackouts because of the no-salt diets that she would partake in. Kapoor mentioned that Sridevi was swearing by one of these routines at the time of her death, even though she had been advised against it by her doctors. The actor believed that salt intake would make her face puffy. The filmmaker also recalled an interaction with Indian actor Nagarjuna, in which he was told that Sridevi had broken her teeth following a fall in the bathroom.
Boney first got to know about these episodes of blackout after he married Sridevi. When a medical checkup was done on Sridevi, the report diagnosed her with issues related to low blood pressure. Later in the interview, Boney recalled how he was questioned for 48 hours straight once the investigation began. He revealed that Sridevi's death was not a natural one, but an accidental one. He chose not to speak about his wife's death because it was too painful for him, and he already told the authorities everything he knew at the time of the investigation. Boney stated that the investigators working on the case had a lot of pressure from the Indian media, and they couldn't afford to miss out on anything. In the end, they were sure that Sridevi's death involved no foul play. He added that he had to take a number of tests, which included a polygraph test as well. He passed them all, and eventually, the case report confidently stated that Sridevi's death was accidental. While some trusted Boney and his version of the story, many thought that it was just another hoax. Even if years would go by, it was evident that Sridevi's unexpected passing would still be talked about and remembered for a long time. On the auspicious occasion of Sridevi's birthday on August 13, 2019, Madame Tussauds Singapore unveiled a plan to immortalize the legendary actress with a dedicated wax statue, promising a perfectly crafted figure that would replicate Sridevi's iconic appearance in the timeless Hawa Hawaii song from the film Mr. India. The ceremony, a fusion of art and emotion, witnessed the presence of Sridevi's husband, Boney Kapoor, alongside her daughters, Janhvi Kapoor and Khushi Kapoor. Simultaneously, the literary world paid homage to Sridevi in 2019 as author Satyarth Nayak penned a biography titled Sridevi, the Eternal Screen Goddess. This literary tribute took a deep dive into the layers of Sridevi's life. The book was very well received by the audiences, as it left a lasting impression of Sridevi's unbeatable legacy on her millions of fans. In the landscape of the Indian film industry, Sridevi stood as a beacon of love and admiration. Her career spanned over 50 years in a wide range of genres, which left many young artists inspired to walk in her footsteps. Despite her untimely departure, Sridevi's essence lived on in the form of her daughter, Janhvi Kapoor, a living reflection of her mother's grace and charm. Following the same path Sridevi had once walked on, Janhvi embraced acting as her chosen craft, embodying the spirit of the cinematic icon. Khushi Kapoor, Sridevi's youngest daughter, is geared up to join the world of Indian cinema and continue the family's cinematic legacy. In the early days of 2023, on Sridevi's death anniversary, Janhvi penned a heartfelt note expressing the unique bond she shared with her mother. It read, "I still look for you everywhere, Mama. Still do everything I do, hoping I'm making you proud. Everywhere I go, and everything I do, it starts and ends with you."
I think for me, there were many things. So I feel like when we had her, my life was completely different. And when we lost her, I was bang in the middle of the shoot of my first film. And then the film came out and then my life changed. So it was almost as if the life I was leading before was this idealistic, fictional life that now I feel like I never really had it, because what I'm living right now is so different. And so the way I think I coped with that loss was that I just dove into work.
When you close your eyes and you think of your mom, what do you remember?
I just remember her calling me Laddu, because she used to call me Laddu.
That's so sweet.
And it's so weird, ma'am, because every time I'm on set and I'm in front of the camera in my most vulnerable moments, I feel like in front of the camera is the closest that I'll ever be to her. And that's why it's such a sacred space for me.
Get everybody out here to my house now!
Okay, all right.
My wife and my kids are dead! Get everybody out here to my house!
On September 28, 2000, 36-year-old former Indiana State Trooper David Camm came back home from a basketball game to a horrific sight. His 35-year-old wife, Kim, was lying dead in a pool of blood on the garage floor. Nearby, in the family car, David's 7-year-old son, Brad, and 5-year-old daughter, Jill, had also suffered the same tragic fate. David placed a 911 call to the Indiana State Police Department, his former workplace, to report this unfathomable tragedy that had befallen his family.
Indiana State Police Radio, Patrice, can I help you?
Patrice, it's Dave Camm. Let me talk to Post Command right now.
Okay, he's on another line.
Right now, let me talk to Post Command.
Hold on. You're my only truth. I needed you like
Dave?
Get everybody out here to my house now!
Okay, all right.
My wife and my kids are dead! Get everybody out here to my house!
Go to Dave Camm's house now, signal 10. Okay, David, we got people on the way, okay?
Get everybody out here!
Come here. Everything's gonna be okay, all right? We're gonna get people.
Everything's not okay. Get everybody out here
Okay,
now!
they're coming. Go to Dave Camm's house now. Okay. Do you know what happened, David?
No! They're dead. I just got them to play back.
4548 Phillipsburg.
Oh my God, what am I going to do? Andrew, get this body out.
David, they're on their way right right now, okay? I got everybody coming. Talk to him on the line. Listen, I'm going to let you talk to Patrice while I get people coming.
the street. I gotta get some help.
Okay, David, do you need an ambulance?
Across my parents' house.
Do you need an ambulance?
Get everybody out.
I'm going. Do you need an ambulance?
I gotta go.
Dave, he hung up.
But who was responsible for this horrific act? Did the perpetrator have a connection to the family, or were they an unknown assailant? We begin our story in New Albany in 1988, when 24-year-old David Ray Camm crossed paths with 23-year-old Kimberly Starr Wren. Endearingly known as Kim by her close circle, she saw David, hailing from a locally prominent family, as her ideal life partner, the man she envisioned growing old alongside. United by their roots in New Albany, Indiana, the couple exchanged vows in the spring of 1989. That same year, David was also accepted into the Indiana State Police as a trooper recruit. Displaying exceptional merit within his workplace, he garnered attention and earned a position within the emergency response unit shortly thereafter. Simultaneously, their family life thrived, and on February 1, 1993, their joy reached new heights with the birth of their son, Bradley. However, things took a downturn in the summer of 1994 when David started an affair with Stephanie McCarty, a young woman he'd met at the gym. This proved even more challenging for Kim due to her ongoing pregnancy with their second child. Matters escalated further, prompting David to relocate from their marital home and move in with his mistress. Despite the challenging circumstances, Kim found solace in the presence of her supportive family. Remarkably, even David's family remained steadfast in their support of her. When Kim gave birth to their daughter, Jillian, on February 28, 1995, both sides of the family were present except for David, who was notably absent. Shortly after Jill's birth, in March 1995, the affair came to an end, prompting David to seek reconciliation with Kim. Despite the pain she'd endured, Kim's love for her husband and her role as a mother of their two children led her to consider giving their relationship another chance. Before long, David resumed living with his family. Both Kim and David's family found themselves surprised at Kim's swift decision to welcome him back into their lives, yet they wholeheartedly backed her choice. To celebrate the reunion of their family, David and Kim began the construction of their new house on Lockhart Road in Georgetown, Indiana. As David and Kim settled into their newly built dream house, it marked the start of a new chapter. While Kim took immense pride in their new home, her true source of joy was witnessing the transformation in David. He had evidently undergone a significant change and dedicated considerable time to bonding with Brad and Jill, that is, whenever his work commitments allowed. As the year 2000 rolled in, everything seemed to be falling into place for this family. Now 7-year-old Brad was attending 2nd grade at Graceland Christian School, while his 5-year-old sister Jill was a kindergarten student in the same school. Kim was excelling in her role as a senior accountant at Aegon Insurance Group in Louisville. Meanwhile, David's path had taken a new direction. After a decade-long tenure as a road trooper with the Indiana State Police, he joined his uncle Sam Lockhart's basement waterproofing business, a decision that yielded double the financial rewards of his previous position. The family finally had everything. However, fate had its own plans in store, ones that would take an unforeseen turn. On the morning of September 28, 2000, the typical routine unfolded in the Camm household. The day began with Kim rising at 6 a.m., followed by David and their children shortly after. After saying farewell to his family, David departed for work. About an hour later, Kim headed out with the children and dropped Bradley and Jill off at their schools. After making arrangements with her parents for later in the day, Kim proceeded to her workplace. Around 4 p.m., she left to collect her daughter from school and accompany her to dance practice. As the evening progressed past 6 p.m., Kim took her son to Riverside Swim Club in New Albany for swimming practice. Shortly after 7 p.m., Kim set out for home accompanied by both children, as their residence lay approximately 11 miles away. Meanwhile, following a busy workday, David Camm returned home around 6 p.m. Then, just before 7 p.m., he made his way to the nearby Georgetown Community Church for a weekly basketball game with a circle of friends. After participating in the initial game, he opted not to continue playing and instead settled into the baseline, engaging in conversation with a respected church elder, Tom Jolly. It was around 9:20 p.m. when the basketball game ended, and David departed for his home, which was located 2.5 miles away. Upon pulling into the driveway, an earth-shattering revelation awaited him, destined to reshape his entire world. As the garage door ascended, an agonizing nightmare unfolded before David's eyes, a sight too horrific to fathom. His whole family was dead. Around 9:30 p.m., David placed a 911 call to the Indiana State Police Department, his former workplace, to report this unfathomable tragedy that had befallen his family. Minutes later, officers from the ISPD arrived at David's house, and one of the first responding officers was Sean Clemens, one of David's former colleagues and closest friends. Before proceeding with the crime scene investigation, he called David for a routine interview.
I'm here at the Indiana State Police Post, and also present is David Camm. We're going to try and find out what happened here, so we can hold that person to justice as best we know how. Do it right. Right. Exactly. For everyone else.
Upon asking what happened, David claimed that after coming back home from the basketball game, he went straight to the garage to park his vehicle. Right there on the garage floor lay Kim, her pants conspicuously missing, and she'd sustained a massive head injury from which a trail of blood had flowed.
And that's when I saw the long stream of blood. I get down in her face and I'm yelling at her, Kim, Kim, Kim. In her eyes, I could tell she was gone. I had no idea what had happened, and it just hit me. Where are the kids? Where are the kids?
As David peered into the family's Ford Bronco parked in the same garage, his heart sank. There in the backseat of the SUV, he found both of his children, Brad and Jill, positioned between the front and rear seats. Jill was sitting upright in the backseat, still strapped into her seatbelt. Similar to Kim, she bore a severe head wound, and it was instantly apparent that she'd passed away.
And I looked in the back, and I looked to the right. That's when I saw Brad. Kind of like he was stretched over the seat. His little eyes, just barely see his little eyes.
Brad, on the other hand, had wounds on his chest, unlike his mother and sister. David said Brad was slumped over the back seat as if he appeared to have attempted to get away from the assailant, and when David touched him, his body felt warm. In that moment, a glimmer of hope flickered within David as he considered the possibility that his son might still be alive. So he quickly removed him from the vehicle and gently placed him on the concrete floor. In an attempt to revive him, David urgently performed CPR. Yet, tragically, it soon became evident that Brad, too, had succumbed to the same fate. David said that he'd then rushed inside his house and called 911. Following the call, he sprinted across the road to his grandfather's house, shouting for someone to tell him what happened, and then dashed back to the garage. After David provided a comprehensive timeline of the day's events, he went on to express his belief that Kim most likely returned home between 7:30 and 7:40 p.m. Taking into account that the children were still in the car at that time, David further stated he believed that the tragic murders occurred within moments of their arrival home. However, he couldn't think of a person with a motive to do this to Kim and the children, as they weren't known to have any enemies. When investigators entered the garage, they discovered Kim on the floor, just as David had described, with her pants removed and blood trailing from her head. Nearby, the bloody pants lay next to the lifeless body of Brad, while Jill's body was found in the back seat of the car. The officers suspected that all three of them had been shot to death. Adding to the intrigue, one peculiar detail stood out: Kim's shoes. In his initial statements to the officers, David also expressed his own perplexity about the situation, emphasizing that Kim would never have done such a thing herself. Furthermore, another significant discovery was made: a sweatshirt neatly tucked next to Brad's lifeless body. Additionally, a palm print was detected on the door of the Ford Bronco, yet its origin couldn't be identified at that time. These findings only added to the complexity of the ongoing investigation. Initially, officers considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. However, this theory was quickly discarded as no indications of forced entry into the garage were found. Furthermore, nothing appeared to have been stolen from the house, and there were no signs that the assailant had attempted to gain entry to the residence. The idea of a robbery occurring without the perpetrator ever entering the house seemed highly improbable. It was becoming increasingly apparent that the killer's intent was not theft, but rather the deliberate demise of Kim, Brad, and Jill. Although David had been cooperative with the authorities, they couldn't fully accept his account. It's standard police procedure to investigate a spouse when a murder occurs, and certain elements of this case raised suspicions about David. One notable concern was how neat the crime scene appeared. Typically, when someone encounters a crime scene and claims to have rendered aid or interacted with it, there would be footprints or signs of disturbance. However, in David's case, there were none. Additionally, a forensic analyst reported observing bleach stains on the Camm house deck, along with the discovery of a mop and bucket inside the residence. To the detectives, these findings suggested potential tampering with the scene. Despite these suspicions, David had not been officially declared a suspect at this point. Detectives collected evidence from the crime scene, including the clothes and shoes David was wearing, and sent it to the lab for further testing. During this difficult period, both Kim's and David's families stood firmly behind him, with none of them believing that David could be in any way responsible for the tragic deaths of his family. Meanwhile, an autopsy was performed on the victims in the Kentucky Medical Examiner's office, and the report only confirmed what detectives had been suspecting all along. All three victims were shot to death. Kim's cause of death was determined to be a single gunshot wound to the head, the range of which couldn't be definitively determined as there was no gunpowder residue found on her. She also had multiple bruises on her body, though there were no signs of assault. Jill's cause of death mirrored her mother's, a gunshot wound to the head. As for Brad, the gunshot that struck him entered his left shoulder, severed his spinal cord, and exited from his right shoulder, leading to his death. In addition to this, the autopsy report concealed a startling secret, one that would not be unveiled until 3 days later. On October 1st, 2000, just hours after the memorial service held for Kim, Brad, and Jill, David Camm was contacted by the authorities and summoned to the Indiana State Police Department for a formal interrogation. Ironically, he found himself regarded with suspicion in the eyes of the very men who had once been his closest friends.
They were family. Brothers, sisters, I loved them. Would have done anything for them. And the one moment in my life where I needed somebody to do something for me, yeah, they turned their backs on me.
We've got some problems with things the way they are. And that's why, we brought you here. We'll give you the opportunity.
I cannot believe. I cannot believe this.
What do you mean? You can't believe what?
You are going to try to blame me for killing my children and my daughter.
The high profile of this case, because of, obviously, as you know well, the notoriety, we're doing this all by the numbers. People heard something they thought was unusual. When we talked to them, they said it sounded like gunfire. The time was when you were already home, which was around 9:20, shortly thereafter.
Evidently, one of David Camm's neighbors, Mrs. Tervry, reported hearing 3 distinct and sharp sounds coming from the Camm residence after 9 p.m. on that fateful evening. Detectives strongly suspected that these were the gunshots heard when David returned home.
I'm just telling you what
It's wrong. It's
are
wrong.
these people making up this time?
I'm telling you, people are confused. The time element is off.
David was adamant in his belief that the timeline had to be incorrect. So the detectives shifted their focus to the next piece of evidence, the bloodstains on David's shirt.
Blood on your shirt, and they'll have the DNA analyzed. This is the presumptive test that it is high-velocity blood spatter. It's scientific documentation. The only way that comes on is from blowback or blowout from a gunshot wound.
That is supposed to be on my t-shirt that I play ball in. So, you.
Interestingly, one forensic analyst at the crime scene had indicated in his notes that the 8 tiny specks of blood found on David's shirt that night were consistent with high-velocity blood splatter.
This is so unique and
typically occurs when a firearm is discharged at close range, implying that David may have shot someone from a close distance.
It's wrong, Daryl.
Dave,
Guys,
what do we do when they tell us that? Now we got to figure out why.
better find another expert.
While David continued to stick to his version of events, insisting that they had it all wrong, detectives decided to reveal their most significant piece of evidence. As it turned out, the autopsy report had disclosed that Jill had suffered blunt force trauma to her genitals, a finding consistent with molestation which likely occurred within hours of her murder. Needless to say, the detectives harbored suspicions that David was responsible.
She was molested. It happened that day, that night. That's when it happened. And it wasn't by me. You guys are wrong here. You're wrong, Mickey. I did not do this. I did not do this. I don't know. That's why I called you guys. That's what your job, that's what you're supposed to be doing. You're looking so hard at me.
We look at everybody, Dave, but honestly,
But Mickey, you're so off base. You're so wrong. You're so wrong, Mickey.
trying to clean this up. Try to clean some of the blood or something like that.
No. This is ridiculous.
What about some bleach, Dave?
No. It's not right. It's not right. It's not right. It's not right, guys. You're not right. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong, Daryl. You're wrong.
Well,
This is not right. You're getting off the track. Something's not right here. Now fix it.
Despite David's persistent denial, he was arrested and subsequently charged with 3 counts of murder following this interrogation. As expected, David pleaded not guilty to all the charges. While everything appeared to be against David Camm, he had one undeniably strong piece of evidence on his side: his airtight alibi of the basketball game. 11 other basketball players said that David was there that night, including David's uncle Sam Lockhart, who himself was one of the players playing basketball that night.
I saw him walking on the side. I saw him sitting down.
Sam Lockhart, along with the rest of David's family, never once believed in his guilt. Instead, they believed that the police hadn't performed a thorough enough investigation.
Is it possible that you just didn't notice that he slipped out for 25, 30 minutes?
No. He was arrested 3 days after the murders. How thorough of an investigation can you do in 3 days? I think once they got beyond the path of no turning back, now their egos become involved and their political aspirations become involved.
While David Camm sat in jail awaiting trial, the prosecution diligently constructed their case. Their theory revolved around the notion that David had assaulted and murdered his family between 9:23 and 9:30 p.m. on that ill-fated night, minutes before making the 911 call. This theory, however, would soon change. David Camm's trial began on January 14, 2002 in Floyd County with a jury brought in from Johnson County. The murders of Kim, Brad, and Jill Camm had already deeply affected this small Indiana town. And as the media became heavily involved in the case, public attention surged. So the defense attorney, Michael McDaniel, was well aware that all eyes would be fixed on the courthouse, and particularly focused on his client. During the trial, a significant change in the timeline presented a challenge to the detectives' initial theory. The autopsy report now indicated that the murders had occurred between 7:30 to 8 p.m. This revelation could have favored David's case. However, the prosecution proposed a different scenario. They suggested that a few minutes into the game, David had left the basketball game unnoticed, driven home to commit the murders, methodically altered and manipulated the crime scene, and then returned to the game and resumed playing in a composed and carefree manner. Subsequently, after the game, he returned home and called the police. However, the prosecution argued that David had orchestrated this entire sequence of events, leveraging his knowledge of police work to create a fabricated alibi to mislead the authorities. The short distance between the church and David's residence, coupled with the distraction of the other players engrossed in the game, meant that he had a window of opportunity to execute this plan without being closely monitored. In support of this argument, the lead prosecutor, Stan Faith, introduced additional evidence. A phone record verified that David had placed a business call from his residence at 7:19 p.m., mere minutes before Kim and the children returned home. This contradicted David's alibi of not being home during that period. In a surprising turn of events, just 5 weeks after the unexpected revelation of the 7:19 p.m. phone call, defense attorney McDaniel introduced a bombshell of his own. He contended that the phone company had difficulty accurately recording the time. As it turned out, there was a 1-hour discrepancy between the actual time and the time reflected in the phone records. Indiana, being one of 2 states with 2 distinct time zones, was what led to this confusion. David Camm's residence was situated in one time zone, while a cell phone company's computers operated in another. A phone company employee testified that a glitch in the computer system had led to an incorrect time on the bill, clarifying that David's phone call had in fact been made at 6:19 p.m., well before his family had returned home. While the situation might have appeared challenging for the prosecution, they still had one more card to play. They claimed to possess scientific evidence in the form of tiny droplets of blood found on David's t-shirt and Kim's blood on David's sneaker. According to the prosecution, this evidence eliminated any reasonable doubt that David was the perpetrator. A bloodstain expert hired by the defense testified that the 8 droplets on David's shirt could have originated when he leaned over to remove his son's body from the SUV. Epstein also proposed that these stains might have been created when David's shirt made contact with the tips of Jill's bloody hair. To support this claim, he even conducted a demonstration using a wig and stage blood to illustrate how these bloodstains could have been transferred to the shirt. However, there wasn't enough concrete evidence to conclusively substantiate this explanation. Prosecutors speculated that adultery was a potential motive for the murders. David Camm expressed regret for his behavior.
It was sheer stupidity on my part. I allowed myself to get caught in something that never should have happened. And, I take full responsibility for that.
One of the witnesses for the prosecution was Marcy McLeod, a friend of Kim Camm. She took the stand and testified that in her final conversation with Kim had cryptically mentioned, "History is repeating itself," without providing further explanation. Marcy interpreted this remark as a suggestion that David had reverted to his old habit of infidelity.
It shows motive, exactly. From a legal standpoint, we're showing what was going on in this man's mind prior, and considerably prior to the murders, and how long it was developing and growing up into the hateful fruit that we saw on September 28th.
One of the most explosive arguments centered around the alleged molestation of Jill. Medical examiner Dr. Tracy Corey believed that this act had occurred within a time frame ranging from 12 to 24 hours prior to her death.
When we began to remove her clothing, we immediately noticed blood. That finding brought things to a halt in the autopsy room at that moment, and then we began the sexual assault examination at that point.
By all accounts, David had not seen Jill after 7 a.m. on the day of her murder. If the molestation had taken place within 12 hours of her death, David wouldn't have had access to her and therefore couldn't have committed the act. However, if it occurred within 24 hours, it presented a different scenario. David Camm vehemently denied his involvement in this unthinkable act.
I said, "What are you talking about?" So this is my 5-year-old daughter, and I did not molest her, and I did not kill her.
Proving that he molested his daughter was extremely challenging for the state, so David was never charged with it. However, it remained a point of discussion during the trial. After roughly 2 months of arguments, the jury finally reached a verdict. On March 17, 2002, following 3 days of deliberation, David Camm was found guilty. The reaction to this outcome was significant. David's family was infuriated because they firmly believed that the jury had made a mistaken judgment.
They're wrong! You all know they're wrong! You know they're wrong! Oh, God!
11 witnesses said he was at the basketball game.
However, the situation was quite different when it came to Kim's family. Initially, they hadn't believed that their son-in-law had any involvement in the murder of their daughter and grandchildren. However, as the trial unfolded, Kim's parents, Janice and Frank Wren, became convinced that their son-in-law was indeed a murderer.
God.
David's family, particularly his older siblings, Donnie and Julie Camm, continued to staunchly were determined in their efforts, and a new defense attorney, Catherine Leal, joined the battle, actively filing appeals for a new trial. Approximately a month later, on April 11, 2002, David Camm was sentenced to 195 years in prison. So, if you're thinking that the suspect was found guilty and the case is closed, my friends, you are very wrong.
This guy's a murderer. He killed his wife. He killed his 2 beautiful children. My name is Charles Bonet, and I'm linked to David Camm.
Did you know Charles Bonet? Had you ever met him?
No.
Never laid eyes on him?
No.
Hang around to learn how this case became even more entangled, with twists emerging in the most unexpected ways possible. In August 2004, the Indiana Court of Appeals overturned the conviction. The court strongly criticized the judge's decision to admit evidence of adultery. In November 2004, charges were refiled against David Camm by the newly appointed prosecutor, Keith Henderson.
My belief now is that this was planned, well in advance.
This time, there was another twist that would rip apart the entire case. A key piece of evidence that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Do you remember the gray sweatshirt we mentioned that was discovered at the crime scene? Well, it turned out that it was never thoroughly investigated. Yet it held 2 crucial pieces of evidence: bloodstains containing DNA and the word backbone inscribed inside the collar. Some of the DNA matched Brad and Kim, but the remaining genetic material belonged to at least 2 unidentified individuals, a man and a woman. None of it matched David Camm. Surprisingly, this mystery DNA was never cross-referenced with the federal database of known felons before the first trial. Prosecutor Keith Henderson was determined to uncover the truth and ordered the laboratory to re-examine all the evidence.
I did not know what we were going to find.
What they discovered changed everything about the case. While the female DNA remained unidentified, the male DNA was matched to a man named Charles Darnell Boney, a convicted felon who had recently been released from prison. Interestingly, Boney went by the nickname Backbone, which was the same name written on the collar of the sweatshirt found at the scene. Hailing from New Albany, Charles Boney had a troubling criminal history that involved a series of violent incidents against women. In 1992, he was found guilty of armed robbery and attempted abduction, during which he held 3 women at gunpoint in a home invasion in Bloomington, Indiana.
Did you think that Charles Bonet was going to kill you that time?
Yes.
You thought you were going to die right there?
Well,
That
yeah,
day?
that night, yes.
That night?
Yes.
He was sentenced to a 20-year prison term for these offenses. Boney was released on parole on June 19, 2000, after serving less than 10 years of his sentence. Boney's dramatic entrance into the Camm case appeared to provide some crucial answers regarding the crime scene, particularly shedding light on the perplexing placement of Kim's shoes on top of the Bronco. Charles Boney had acquired the notorious nickname the Shoe Bandit due to his disturbing obsession with feet. He had a history of stealing shoes from women he assaulted, often taking just 1 shoe from each victim. In fact, when asked, Boney openly acknowledged this fascination.
Quite honestly, for anyone who doesn't know the story, I have a fetish.
On February 17, 2005, Louisville Metro police officers located Boney and brought him to the Floyd County Prosecutor's Office for an interrogation. At this point, he wasn't a suspect, but was a person of interest to the detectives who were curious to know how Boney's shirt ended up in the Camm's garage. Initially, when Boney was shown the gray sweatshirt, he acknowledged that it was his, but he claimed that he donated the garment to a Salvation Army Dropbox for charity in July or August 2000. He insisted that he didn't know how his sweatshirt got to the crime scene and maintained that he didn't even know David Camm.
Never, ever encountered Mr. David Camm.
However, after taking a polygraph test, Boney was found to be lying. Despite this, he was released, with law enforcement keeping a close eye on him by placing a tracking device on his vehicle. Surprisingly, the next day, Boney's vehicle was tracked to the vicinity of the cemetery where the victims were buried. The tracking device also showed that Boney's vehicle traveled within half a mile of the location where David Camm worked, raising further suspicions about his involvement in the case. In the meantime, the murder investigation had another lead. The female DNA on the sweatshirt had also turned up a match. This brought the authorities all the way to Trinidad, to a young woman named Mala Singh Mattingly. It was discovered that the unidentified female DNA found on Boney's sweatshirt was a match to her DNA, intensifying suspicions surrounding Charles Boney. As it turned out, Mala was Boney's girlfriend at the time of the murders. Their romance, however, was short-lived. The police eventually apprehended Charles Boney on March 4, 2005, after the latent print examiner confirmed a perfect match between the handprint found on Kim Camm's car exterior and Boney's own prints. Charles Boney was adamant that he was not the killer. He stated to investigators, "I'd rather take my own life than harm children." Boney's arrest initially appeared as a victory for the defense. David was released on bond. Shortly after this, the murder charges against David were also dropped. His family couldn't have been happier witnessing that for the first time in years, there were no charges against him. David hoped this would mark the end of his legal troubles.
My initial presumption was, we've got the guy, it's over.
Sadly, the relief was short-lived. Just hours later, armed with warrants, officers arrested David once more. They informed him that he was being recharged and would now face an additional charge of conspiracy, as they believed that David and Boney were accomplices in the crime. After experiencing a brief taste of freedom, David was swiftly returned to jail. Prosecutor Keith Henderson explained that he couldn't allow David to remain free, as they feared that he might attempt to flee.
I didn't want David Camm to flee. I got a guy that's convicted and sentenced to 195 years, a natural life sentence.
David Camm denied ever knowing Boney.
Did you know Charles Boney? Had you ever met him?
No.
Never laid eyes on him?
No.
Boney, on the other hand, after initially denying that he never met David Camm, changed his story after his arrest. He stated that his initial encounter with David occurred in July 2000 during a game of full-court basketball at a local park. Furthermore, Boney alleged that he and David never communicated via telephone, but would meet in front of a convenience store situated next to Karim's Meat Market, which was owned by Kim's younger sister, Debbie Wren. It was during one of these meetings that David approached Boney, seeking to obtain a clean and untraceable firearm.
He asked me if I had access or knew of a way in order to gain access to specifically a handgun.
Boney claimed that despite knowing David's background as a former ISP trooper, he trusted him enough to acquire a firearm for him. Boney asserted that he reached out to his longtime acquaintance, Gary Gherkin, who resided in Louisville, and proceeded to purchase a .380 caliber firearm. Boney further claimed that he'd sold David the gun on the afternoon of the murders, with the exchange occurring in the same Karim's parking lot. He said that he then followed David to his house out of curiosity, tailing him for 15 minutes or longer. According to Boney's account, once they reached the Camm house, he positioned himself outside the garage beside his car when Kim and the children arrived home. Boney said he saw David enter the garage after Kim.
I heard him talking a little more loudly, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I hear a pop. And then I hear another pop, and then the third pop. They were the gunshot deaths of his family.
Boney claimed David then walked outside the garage and confronted him.
When he came out of the garage, he pointed that weapon at me, and he pulled it, and there was nothing discharged.
Boney said that when the gun jammed, David panicked. He asserted that despite a close call with death, he seized this opportunity to chase David into the garage.
Who goes running after somebody who's just tried to kill him?
Why not run after him? There's no bullets in the weapon. I did go in after him, and if someone doesn't believe that, that's fine.
During this sequence of events, Boney said he stumbled over Kim's shoes. In doing so, he picked them up and placed them neatly on top of the car. Boney then leaned into the vehicle to peer inside out of sheer curiosity. It was during this moment he claimed that his palm print was accidentally left on the car as he gazed at Jill and Brad inside the vehicle. He then made the decision to leave and promptly fled the scene. On March 9, 2005, both men, Charles Boney and David Camm, were charged with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. They were scheduled to be trialed for the same crime simultaneously, but in different locations within the state. Boney in New Albany and Camm 100 miles away in Boonville. Boney's trial commenced on January 10, 2006, during which he repeated the same story he'd previously told, that he'd sold a gun to David Camm and then witnessed him commit the murders of his entire family. Boney's narrative was plagued by numerous inconsistencies and lacked any supporting evidence or corroboration from witnesses, records, documents, or any other sources. As a result, the jury found it challenging to accept that he wasn't an active participant in the murders. On January 26, 2006, Boney was ultimately found guilty of the murders of the Camm family and conspiracy to commit murder.
We have breaking news in the Charles Bonnet triple murder trial. The jury just reached a verdict.
Subsequently, on February 23, 2006, he received a sentence of 225 years for his role in the tragic killings. David Camm's second trial began on January 17, 2006. The trial primarily centered on the analysis of blood splatter patterns and the molestation of Jill Camm. Experts on the prosecution side argued that both pieces of evidence implicated David, while experts on the defense's side presented reasons why he couldn't have been responsible for them.
What's it like to hear those allegations?
Now that makes my blood boil. That's the one thing that really infuriates me more than a lot of things.
Because?
Because it's not true and because it is so inflammatory.
In the end, David Camm's worst fears came true.
Spent a lot of time on my knees praying and believing.
On March 3, 2006, the jury determined him to be guilty of the murder. David Camm was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite his conviction, David Camm's battle for his freedom was far from over.
How do you convince people now from this place that you're an innocent man? You've had 2 trials, 2 convictions.
At this point, Richard, people have formulated an opinion, and they either believe in me or they don't. There's one group of individuals that I'm concerned with right now, and that is the Indiana Supreme Court.
With his family standing by him, he continued to assert his innocence. His parents, Susie and Donald Camm, had mortgaged nearly all their possessions in their relentless pursuit of justice. In the interviews conducted from prison, he consistently insisted that Charles Boney had fabricated his account in an attempt to incriminate him in the crime, and that he was having to pay for Boney's sins. At this point, David again appealed his conviction, highlighting the prejudicial nature of the molestation allegations and the absence of evidence firmly linking him to the injuries. In a significant turn of events, in June 2009, the Indiana Supreme Court reversed his second conviction.
And I turned on the TV, and there it was.
And?
Tears, people yelling, just an overwhelming happiness.
And were you ready to go through this again?
Absolutely.
The court concluded that there was insufficient substantial evidence to support the claim that David had molested his daughter. In July 2010, the Indiana Supreme Court designated Spencer Circuit Judge Jonathan A. Dart as a special judge to preside over David Camm's third trial. So, Indianapolis defense attorney Richard Kamen took over as David's legal representation for his third trial. Stacy Uliana, a member of David's defense team during his second trial, also partnered with Kamen to provide support in David's third trial. They had an extensive task ahead of them to try and secure David's exoneration.
What kind of pressure does that put on you as a defense lawyer?
Huge.
Yeah.
In February 2011, the defense made a motion to have Keith Henderson, the prosecutor from the second trial, removed from the case. This request was based on the revelation that Henderson had signed a contract for which he had received $4,000 in advance to write a book about the Camm family shooting. As a result, in February 2012, Stanley Levko was appointed as the special prosecutor for David Camm's trial and had to familiarize himself with the details of the 13-year-long case.
We're putting on the evidence as best we can.
How does this rate with the number of boxes, I guess, that you have on a normal case?
Oh, this is, I personally never tried a case with this much.
On August 19, 2013, the third trial began in Lebanon, Indiana, with one of the highlights being Charles Boney taking the stand as a witness. This trial revisited much of the evidence presented in previous trials, including discussions about blood splatter and Jill's molestation. However, what set this trial apart were the multiple bombshell revelations. For starters, the prosecution alleged a motive related to the life insurance policies that Kim Camm had purchased just months before her murder. The prosecution argued that these policies were a primary incentive for the crime. However, the defense countered by pointing out that Kim wasn't the only one with insurance. In fact, David himself had also purchased life insurance policies for himself. Notably, Stites was neither a crime scene reconstructionist nor a blood spatter expert. In fact, he had no more qualifications than a crime scene photographer. Despite his limited expertise, Stite shared his opinions, which ultimately played a pivotal role in implicating David. As a result, the defense argued that Stite's opinions lacked the necessary validity to be considered reliable evidence in a courtroom. Crucial evidence in the trial came from the testimony of Boney's ex-girlfriend, Mala Singh Mattingly. She stated that she witnessed Boney leaving on the night of the murder, with him telling her that he was going to assist a friend. Prosecutors argued that this friend referred to David Camm. At the time, Mala didn't think much of Boney's departure. However, a few hours later, Boney returned home and woke her up. When asked to describe his demeanor upon returning, Mala mentioned that he seemed excited, was catching his breath, and appeared panting. She also noticed a scrape on his knee. Still drowsy, Mala said that Boney insisted on showing her a gun. It wasn't certain if Mala had seen the murder weapon, which had never been found at the crime scene. Nevertheless, her account raised suspicion regarding Boney's involvement in the murders. The trial also introduced new DNA evidence that had not been presented in the previous two trials. Forensic expert Dr. Richard Eikelenboom testified that he discovered touch DNA consistent with Charles Boney in various places on the clothing of both Kim and Jill Camm. Findings appeared to challenge Boney's statement that he'd never touched the victims. In response to this touch DNA evidence, the defense argued that if Boney had physically attacked the family, as the DNA seemed to suggest, it was unlikely that David Camm was the shooter. With this new touch DNA evidence placing Boney in a more active role in the crime, the prosecution introduced an alternative theory that David had aided and abetted Boney during the murders, but was not the shooter himself. However, they were unable to substantiate this claim with concrete evidence. It came to light that during the time of the murders, Boney lived with his mother, who regularly tasked him with errands to a local meat store. Intriguingly, this meat store was the same one owned by Kim's sister and brother-in-law, and it was a place frequented by Kim and her children as part of their routine. Intriguingly, this was the very store where Boney said he used to meet David Camm. This raised the possibility that Boney may have had prior knowledge of the victims. The defense attorneys argued that Boney followed Kim and the children home, assaulted them, and then murdered them to conceal his crime.
One of our goals from the very beginning was to try and explain to the jury how events unfolded in the garage.
One of the factors that significantly undermined Charles Boney's credibility in the eyes of the jury was his inability to provide accurate answers to questions related to critical details, such as what David Camm was wearing that night or what vehicle he was driving. These incorrect responses raised doubts about the truthfulness of his account of witnessing David committing the murders of his family. Following 8 weeks of experts engaging in heated debates and witnesses offering contradictory testimonies, the jury deliberated for 10 hours before returning with a verdict. In light of the evidence presented during the third trial, on October 24, 2013, the jury found David Camm
The truth is going to prevail, but I had to hear 3 knots. You know, the first knot wasn't in and of itself sufficient. I wailed, I cried, I bent over, I stood up, I may have praised God, I thanked the jury over and over and over again.
After 13 years of continuous legal battles, David Camm was finally free and acquitted of the allegations against him. It was all David's family ever wanted.
God is good, praise God, that's it. I don't know what else to say. Nothing more eloquent than that.
I can't tell you what I feel. I've never had this feeling before in my life. I hope it's not a dream, okay? I've had this dream before. I hope you guys are real.
This was deeply emotional for everyone involved, including David's defense attorneys, Richard Cammon and Stacy Uliana. This case had meant a lot to them as well.
Said thank you to the jury,
right?
Because they have a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to stand up to the state of Indiana in 13 years.
On the other hand, there were Kim's parents who weren't so sure of his innocence.
So when I heard him not guilty, my gosh, did I hear that right? Or what went wrong? What made this jury believe he's not guilty?
To this day, Charles Boney maintains his innocence. In an interview from prison, Boney said that even though he's innocent, he doesn't regret the place he now finds himself because it brought him to Christianity.
We're clearly both there, and one of us is the killer. David Camm is the killer, but I don't regret the time that I have. I wouldn't change it because it's made me better. It's helped me grow.
Since his acquittal in 2013, David Camm has been diligently working to rebuild his life.
In some aspects, it's like I was never gone. Giving them hugs and kisses, and it's just a real joy.
He found love again and relocated to Indianapolis, Indiana. Currently, he serves as a case coordinator for Investigating Innocence, a nonprofit organization committed to advocating for American inmates they believe have been wrongfully convicted. Sadly, David's reconciliation with his former in-laws never happened, as they still believe that he's guilty.
I can't imagine what they'd be like today.
In 2016, David reached an agreement with Floyd County officials to settle for $450,000. This settlement resulted from a civil suit he filed for wrongful prosecution following his acquittal. It marked a significant step towards seeking justice and compensation for the years he spent wrongfully imprisoned. But the question is, can money really compensate for all that suffering? Perhaps to David Camm, the answer would be no.
You can't wreck someone's life, take away their freedom, their liberties, their reputation, their identity, their hometown. You're not supposed to be able to do that in this country.
After all, freedom is non-negotiable.
What does freedom feel like?
It's amazing. It's hard not to find me with a smile on my face. It's just an overwhelming happiness that I can't and don't want to ever lose.
In January 1979, 16-year-old Kim Bryant's life was cut tragically short, and Metro detectives spun their wheels trying to find a killer for 42 years. Now, they've cracked the case, bringing some solace to surviving family.
When 16-year-old Kim Bryant went missing from a Dairy Queen across the street from Western High School in Las Vegas, everybody thought she ran away. She'd expressed thoughts of doing so in the past. Not days later, a shocking discovery changed the course of the investigation altogether. Yet, with its many twists and turns, the case remained unsolved over 4 decades. However, as time passed, new evidence and fresh perspectives emerged, reigniting the investigation and bringing hope for closure. Did Kim really run away from her home? Or were some secrets yet to be let out of the bag? Hi, and welcome back to Mysterious 7. Today we delve into a 42-year-old cold case with the most insane twists. Las Vegas, Nevada is an iconic and vibrant city, known as the city that never sleeps. Las Vegas has a population of over 650,000 people and is a mecca for tourists. Famous for the extravagant nightlife, luxurious hotels, and world-renowned casinos, Las Vegas is known as the entertainment capital of the world. Apart from its unique blend of glamour and excitement, this one-of-a-kind city also showcases the city's rich history and unique culture. For some, this is the place where dreams come true. Sadly, this is also the place where, in 1979, one family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered dreams. Today's story takes us to the morning of January 26, 1979, when 16-year-old sophomore Kim Bryant joined her classmates at Western High School in Las Vegas for registration day to choose her classes for the upcoming year. After finishing the registration for new classes, Kim walked with a friend across Decatur Boulevard, a busy street on the western side of the city. The girls stopped at a Dairy Queen, a fast food restaurant located directly across the street from the Western High School football field. It was about 10 a.m. It was still a few hours before the restaurant opened for the day, but the students flocked to a nearby parking lot to hang out. The day was passing as normal until a late 1950s Chevy with a sanded silver-gray primer finish and sporting raised back wheels pulled up in front of the Dairy Queen. 2 young men in the car passed some obscene comments to the high school girls, to which Kim and her friend responded back with some indecent words of their own. As the situation went sour, the car sped off into the traffic along the southbound road. Not long after this altercation, Kim was offered a lift from her friend who came to pick up her daughter. Kim asked her to wait a minute while she ran to a nearby payphone to call her boyfriend. She quickly returned and thanked her for the offer, but she told them that her boyfriend was on his way to give her a ride home. It was about 10:10 a.m. when they drove off, leaving Kim alone in front of the Dairy Queen. Kim's boyfriend pulled into the parking lot of the Dairy Queen at about 10:30 a.m., but there was no sign of his girlfriend. He waited for a few minutes before driving off, assuming that Kim must have caught a ride with someone else. Back at Kim's home on Banjo Circle, Las Vegas, Kim's mother, Sherry Elliott, became concerned when her daughter had not returned home. That day, Kim was supposed to go shopping with her mother around 12:30 p.m., and Sherry knew Kim would never miss out on a shopping trip, especially without calling. With a foreboding feeling that she just couldn't shake, Sherry headed out to look for her daughter, but couldn't find any trace of her. At 5:30 p.m., Kim's mother and stepfather went to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department to file a missing persons report. Although Sherry was confident that Kim was in trouble, the officers speculated that Kim ran away from home. The belief was further strengthened when they learned about a verbal fight between Kim and her parents that took place the night before. Kim's parents kept insisting that she'd always call if she was late, but the police said it sounded like their daughter had run away and was probably staying at a friend's house. They wanted to wait a few days to see if Kim came home. This was common protocol for police departments in those days. Desperate to find their missing daughter, Kim's parents reached out to the local media to spread the word about the disappearance, but the media outlets refused to take any action until Kim was officially reported missing. After a full day of futile efforts to find her by themselves, Kim's parents demanded that more action be taken to locate her. Finally, detectives with the Juvenile Division went to Kim's house in an attempt to find clues, and they discovered the missing girl's diary. Parts of the diary contained scribblings about her desire to run away from home, which further confirmed their belief. For the time being, this remained a low-priority case. Kim's disappearance didn't pique law enforcement attention until police learned that Kim's backpack was found. Surprisingly, the same day when Kim went missing, sometime around noon, a motorist driving along Decatur and Charleston Boulevard in Las Vegas noticed a backpack lying abandoned in the middle of the street. Upon opening the bag, the man discovered a purse containing a driver's license belonging to Kim Bryant, along with textbooks and gym clothes. He even called Kim's home, but nobody answered. However, authorities only learned about this incident a week later. This prompted them to officially declare Kim a missing person and finally start an investigation into the disappearance. Despite a massive search effort, authorities failed to come up with anything. Kim's story was published in the local newspaper, but there was still no sign of the teen. On the afternoon of February 20th, 1979, nearly a month after Kim Bryant vanished into thin air, 3 teenage boys were hiking through the desert on the western edge of Las Vegas, which was 4 miles from the school. Near the power substation at the edge of Buffalo Avenue and Charleston Boulevard, in the underdeveloped deserted area, one of the boys noticed something unusual. It seemed like a wig was tangled amidst the dirt and rocks. As they approached to get a closer look, they discovered the lifeless body of a woman lying face down in a shallow grave covered with debris. Authorities were immediately alerted. After examining the crime scene, the body was quickly identified as Kim Bryant from a rabbit fur coat found nearby, which Kim was wearing when she disappeared. Her body was partially clothed and naked from the waist down, which suggested that she'd been sexually assaulted prior to her murder. Detectives determined that Kim had likely been struck in the head with a rock multiple times, possibly with one of the stones scattered near the disposal site. Her hands sustained many defensive injuries, indicating that she had put up a fight with her killer before ultimately losing her life. From the crime scene, it was also apparent that the killer had most likely tried to hide the body, hoping nobody would find it. Her body was taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. The autopsy results further confirmed the theory of assault, and the cause of death was also listed as blunt force trauma. Foreign DNA was also collected from her body and was kept in reserve for future testing. But the result also revealed something else, and potentially the most tragic aspect of the story. Initially, authorities believed that Kim had been murdered shortly after her disappearance, but the autopsy report suggested that she was kept alive for up to 4 days after the abduction. However, the report could not provide any significant leads to find the perpetrator. As the community of Las Vegas was terrified by the gruesome slaying of Kim Bryant, and her heartbroken family was left mourning her loss, homicide detectives were on the hunt for the killer. In the days following the discovery of Kim's body, tips flooded into the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. One of the most alarming tips came from a group of individuals who claimed to have witnessed Kim's abduction by several men in a Jeep. However, the accused individuals associated with the Jeep provided solid alibis to investigators. There was another lead where one man claimed that he'd witnessed the murder, but later admitted that he made the statement after overhearing a group of local kids talking about the crime. After an initial flurry of investigative activity, the leads began to dwindle after a few months. With an increasing number of homicides in Las Vegas in that year, investigators were stretched thin. Under the burden of a heavy workload, detectives were forced to shift their attention to the new cases, and Kim's case lay dormant in the files. With no concrete leads to follow up on, the case was slowly turning cold with each passing day. The case caught its first significant break in the summer of 1979 after a local newspaper ran a lengthy feature on the status of the investigation and how the crime affected the Las Vegas community. The news feature also refreshed the memory of two of Kim's classmates at Western High School. The female students, whose identity has never been released in public, said that around the time of Kim's disappearance, they'd been approached by two men driving a Chevy. The men attempted to lure the girls into their car with an offer to sell them jewelry, but the girls grew suspicious when they peered into the back seat and saw only a large walnut-grained speaker. After the girls rejected the offer, the men drove away while verbally abusing them. The girls described the car as silver with light primer spots and raised back wheels bearing Nevada plates. The two students also provided independent descriptions of the passenger of the car. This description allowed the detectives to develop the first sketch of a potential suspect in the Kim Bryant case. The seemingly 18 or 19-year-old man in the sketch had shaggy blonde hair and droopy stoner eyes. The girl stated that the driver was a man in his early 20s with a mustache and medium brown hair. The girls described both of the men as grubby hippies. Another eyewitness, an older businessman, also came out after the sketch was released to the public and informed the authorities that he too had witnessed Kim being forced into a car, similar to what the two girls described. He said he assumed the incident was nothing more than a high school prank and hadn't reported it to the police. This was a massive development in the case, but unfortunately, this was all the information detectives had to go on, and the investigation slowed down once again after a few busy days. However, it was not the first twist in this puzzling case, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. The next lead came in on the heels of an unexpected tragedy in town. It was the death of a 37-year-old, a local roofer who went missing the day after Kim's abduction. The body of Bobby Jean Thomas was discovered after a month in a steep dirt road about a mile from the Hoover Dam. He died in a gruesome way, suffering approximately 36 stab wounds, including one to the eye. The sadistic killer had tortured him before ending his life, and his body had been brutalized even after his death. But this death seemingly had nothing to do with Kim Bryant's. That is, until authorities found Thomas's killer, Ronnie Lee Fain. Fain, then 24 years of age, was arrested in connection with the murder of Bobby Jean Thomas in early 1980, just a year after the discovery of Thomas's body. Shortly after his arrest, Fain reached out to Las Vegas prosecutors to make a deal. As an allegiance to the deal, he would not only confess to the killing of Bobby Jean Thomas, but in a shocking turn of events, he also provided authorities with information related to the Kim Bryant murder case. On April 22, 1980, Ronnie Lee Fain pleaded guilty to a second-degree murder charge for Bobby Jean Thomas's murder. There, he agreed to give an account of the events leading up to the murder. Fain, who had already spent most of his life imprisoned in the California penal system, moved to Las Vegas after being released from prison in 1978 and settled down in an apartment in downtown Vegas with his girlfriend, Lori Lamson. As a part of the same community, Fain and Bobby had known each other for quite some time. On January 27, 1979, just a day after Kim Bryant had disappeared from the neighborhood, Fain stated that he joined Thomas on a joyride with two other men whom he only knew by their nicknames, Worm and Hulk. As the sun went down, the group made the drive back towards the bright lights of Las Vegas. After dropping off Worm and Hulk, it was just Fain and Thomas in the car, and the two began chatting. At some point, as Fain put it, Thomas, in his drunken state, started to tell his new companion a bone-chilling story. He described how he'd taken part in the abduction, assault, and murder of a teenage girl the day before. Fain claimed, bound by prison honor, he immediately decided to avenge the girl's death. When the car arrived at Fain's place, he told Thomas to wait inside the car and then retrieved a knife from his girlfriend. Upon returning to the car, Fain immediately began attacking and slashing Thomas to death, imposing at least 36 blows from the blade. Fain further described that he then drove out to the desolate area around Hoover Dam to dispose of the corpse. Fain insisted that he was enraged by Thomas's mindless bragging, and that was the only reason he killed him. Although a killer's words are not always trustworthy, authorities took him very seriously. Apparently, before taking the plea deal, Fain passed 2 independently administered lie detector tests before prosecutors accepted his plea. He'd also correctly identified the brand of beer on a bottle that was located near the disposal site of Kim Bryant. But even with this confession, there were more questions than answers. As investigators began looking deeper into the past of Bobby Jean Thomas, they soon learned that Thomas was not a naive victim who lost his life at the hands of Ronnie Lee Fain. Rather, he was indeed someone quite capable of murder. In fact, throughout his life, Thomas had a history of crimes against young women and girls. On a cold winter night in January 1970, Thomas attacked 20-year-old Christine Lee McKinney along Las Vegas Boulevard as she was trying to start her stalled car. Fortunately, she was able to escape the assault, and Thomas was arrested and faced charges of assault with the intent to commit a crime. Just 2 years later, on January 15, 1972, Thomas drugged and assaulted his 14-year-old sister-in-law, Helen Hines, resulting in her death. He was arrested on charges of assault and involuntary manslaughter, but he still made bail. Just days before the trial, Thomas agreed to plead guilty to the statutory assault charge in exchange for having the manslaughter charges dismissed. He was sentenced to the maximum term of 10 years behind bars. However, he was paroled after serving only a portion of his sentence. Around the time of Kim Bryant's murder, Thomas abducted and attempted to sexually assault a young woman in the desert, the same area where he'd meet his own demise not long after. Despite this horrid history, detectives had no physical proof to connect Thomas to Kim, and there were many holes to be poked in this theory. Detective Bob Hilliard, head of the Kim Bryant investigation, was unsure whether Thomas was responsible for Kim Bryant's death. Although he passed 2 polygraph tests, there were several inconsistencies in Fain's story. Hilliard was bothered by the fact that Fain never mentioned Kim's name in his initial confession. Fain also didn't include any details that were not already publicly known about the Kim Bryant case. He initially said all he knew was that Bobby Jean Thomas had assaulted and killed a teenager. It was only after his attorney mentioned the name Kim Bryant that Fain added that to his story. As for the beer bottle discovered near the crime scene, it had been located 70 yards away from her body and looked like it had been there longer than Kim's remains. This could have been left by people just enjoying a drink in the desert. Additionally, Fain's description of the vehicle that Thomas used for the abduction did not match the description of the eyewitnesses. Detectives at this point considered that in his drunken state, Thomas might have mixed up the date of his attempted rape with the day of Kim's abduction when rambling about his actions to Fain. But this was not all. Detectives also discovered a disturbing fact about Ronnie Lee Fain. He appeared to have a thing for stabbing people. Just a month before murdering Thomas, in December of 1978, Fain attacked one of his acquaintances in a downtown apartment in Las Vegas. It wouldn't have been much of a stretch to imagine a sociopath fabricating a story of avenging a young girl's murder in the hopes of a lighter sentence. There was another possibility that investigators couldn't help but consider. It was possible that both Fain and Thomas had been involved in Kim's abduction and murder, but later Fain killed Thomas in an attempt to eliminate a witness against him. Despite all the speculation, the truth was, no one knew if Thomas was really responsible for Kim's death, or if Fain was making up the story. Kim's case remained open despite Fain's claims. By the mid-1980s, Kim Bryant's parents had moved away from Las Vegas to escape from the nightmare of living in a place where their daughter's life was brutally cut short. However, they continued to stay in touch with the police about the status of Kim's case. Around this time, this case would take yet another shocking turn when a new suspect would come into the picture, along with the possibility that Kim was one of several victims of a ruthless cross-country serial killer. The city of Las Vegas witnessed more similar murders in the months and years following the tragedy of Kim's death. Nearly 9 months after Kim Bryant's abduction and murder, On September 25, 1979, 22-year-old Sheila Griffith went missing after leaving the Silver Nugget in Las Vegas with a man. Her body was found on November 27, 1979, in the Mojave Desert near the Nevada state line. 4 months later, on January 16, 1980, 18-year-old Susan Bellotti went missing when she failed to return to her Las Vegas home after a local shopping trip. Her body was found after 5 months on May 26, 1980, near Bloomington, Las Vegas. Then, on June 27, 1980, 20-year-old Cheryl Daniel was abducted from a parking lot in Las Vegas. Her body was found on December 13, 1980, in Hellhole Canyon near St. George, with a gunshot wound to the head. Initially, authorities in Las Vegas suspected that these 4 murders were connected, but they didn't have any evidence leading them to the killer. However, an ID card that was located near Cheryl's body led detectives to a man named Robert Generoso. Robert Generoso arrived in Las Vegas from San Francisco sometime around 1977. He took up painting and insulation installation work at building sites around town. In November of 1977, he married a local school teacher by the name of Sylvia. The couple settled down in a middle-class neighborhood on the western side of the city, which was less than a 10-minute drive from the disposal site of Kim Bryant's body. From the outside, they were a happy family, even welcoming a child in 1980. Yet beneath this happy facade, Robert Generoso was living a life of deception and lies. In a shocking twist, detectives discovered Robert Generoso did not exist. Shortly after the Las Vegas police began investigating Robert Generoso and his role in the murders of Cheryl Daniel, the FBI informed them of Generoso's real identity. Their first link was the ID card under the name of Robert Generoso that was found near Cheryl's body. However, why the FBI didn't arrest him previously is not clear. The real name of the man they were looking for was Stephen Peter Morin. Before moving to Las Vegas, throughout his early life, Generoso had been in and out of jail constantly, both in Florida and San Francisco. On September 26, 1976, Morin tricked and assaulted a 14-year-old girl in his Marina District apartment in San Francisco. As authorities were preparing to apprehend him, he stayed one step ahead of the law and fled to Las Vegas under the alias of Robert Island. He soon took up the name of Robert Generoso after finding the name of a deceased man that was of a similar age and appearance to himself. Unfortunately, authorities were not quick enough to apprehend him, and once again, Morin evaded arrest by fleeing Las Vegas. As detectives were combing through his property to find clues to his whereabouts, they discovered something which provided them more strong reasons to believe that Morin was connected to Kim's murder. In a storage unit owned by Morin off of Valley View Boulevard, detectives discovered a macrame belt similar to the one Kim wore on the day of her disappearance, which was missing from the crime scene. Morin's then estranged wife, Sylvia, who separated from her husband at some point in 1980, provided further links to the Bryant murder when she told police about a broken lighter that Morin had brought home on one occasion. Kim's parents confirmed that their daughter routinely carried a broken gold lighter with her. Kim's parents also recalled that about 2 weeks before her disappearance, she had told them about a new male friend, Joe. This man picked Kim up for skating night at the Playland skating rink on Valley View Boulevard. He was driving a vehicle similar to Morin's dark-colored Ford Ranchero. However, his behavior soon turned aggressive after they arrived at the skating rink. Kim felt so afraid that she asked her ex-boyfriend, who was also present at the rink, for a ride home. On the way back, Kim and her ex-boyfriend were followed by Joe's car in an erratic manner. The ex-boyfriend later identified a photo of Morin as the man present that night at Playland. Even with all of this evidence, authorities failed to make an arrest in days, and even months, which gave him the opportunity to commit a few more crimes. Morin was in Hawaii at this point. Meanwhile, back in Las Vegas, investigators were doing everything in their power to gather enough evidence against him. Perhaps Morin knew that his luck was running out. In December of 1980, Robert would place a few cryptic calls to his estranged wife Sylvia, trying to trick her into saying what the police knew. He insisted that he was being set up by the police. Days later, he traveled to Northern California. Even though Morin was a federal fugitive at this point, he failed to lay low. On January 5, 1981, he was arrested in Pleasanton, California for waving a .45 pistol at 2 men during an argument. However, he was released on $500 bail pending trial, after providing the authorities with an alias. After his release, he quickly fled California and hitchhiked around the country. At some point, he began a romantic relationship with the owner of a local antique shop in Buffalo, New York, named Rita Xavier. Somehow, he managed to convince Rita to come down with him on the run. Rita even agreed to sell her store and bought a travel van with the money, and the pair continued to travel. During a brief stint in Denver, Morin kidnapped and murdered a 23-year-old college student, Sheila Whalen, a recent college graduate. Morin and Rita were long gone from Denver at that point, and they headed south to Texas. But soon Rita would return to New York as she grew frustrated seeing Morin constantly checking out other women. Before long, Morin charmed another young woman by the name of Sarah Clark, and she further accompanied him on his murderous journey. On November 30th, 1981, Morin abducted 23-year-old Pamela Jackson from a Corpus Christi apartment complex and held her captive. For the next 11 days, she was sexually assaulted multiple times a day. On December 2nd, 1981, Morin abducted 21-year-old Jenna Bruce from the Hilton Inn parking lot, and her body was found the following day, floating in 2 feet of water in a culvert on Padre Island. Morin murdered 2 more women, both times to steal their cars, as the couple traveled through Texas. Morin and Sarah even kidnapped a woman from an apartment complex in Corpus Christi and forced her to accompany them on their journey. Just 4 days after this mindless murder, on December 6, 1981, Morin shot 29-year-old Michael Reed and 26-year-old Pearl Lutz during an abduction attempt in San Antonio. Fortunately, they both survived. During all these crimes, Morin was always on the move and never stayed in one place. Call it sheer luck or a lack of rapid action on the part of law enforcement, but Morin always stayed one step ahead of them, even when he was keeping Pamela hostage and forcing her to move with him and Sarah. On December 11, 1981, Morin shot 21-year-old Carrie Scott and 25-year-old Drew Valdez outside a San Antonio restaurant while trying to steal Scott's car. While Valdez survived the attack, sadly, Scott succumbed to his injuries. It was the following day of December 12, 1981, that police finally tracked Morin to a hotel in San Antonio, where they located Pamela Jackson alive and were able to arrest Sarah. But Morin managed to slip out a window just moments before police arrived. But he didn't keep quiet. Rather, amidst the police manhunt itself, he abducted another woman from a department store parking lot. But over several hours, the woman managed to convince Morin to turn himself in without further bloodshed, using quotes from Bible verses. Surprisingly, Morin let go of this hostage and called the police from an Austin bus station, where he was soon arrested without incident. Stephen Peter Morin faced 2 separate trials in Texas for 2 completely separate murders and was convicted in both cases and twice sentenced to death by lethal injection. He was also found guilty of 1 murder and received a death sentence in Colorado. Utah was also in line for trial, but ceased its efforts to extradite Morin after his convictions in the Texas cases. Shortly afterward, detectives from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department traveled to Texas to interview Morin about the murders of Kim Bryant, Cheryl Daniel, and Susan Bellotti, but the killer persistently refused to discuss his time in Vegas. Though there was ample circumstantial evidence putting Morin with the motive, means, and opportunity to carry out these slayings, due to a lack of physical evidence, no indictments were ever issued in relation to these crimes. Stephen Peter Morin was finally executed by lethal injection on March 13, 1985, in a Texas prison. Despite this, Kim Bryant's family still had no concrete resolution to her case. With each passing year, the probability of solving this case was decreasing. With the advancements in DNA, the case got further attention. In 2008, the DNA sample that was collected from the victim's body during the autopsy was tested, but they were unable to get a DNA profile. For over a decade, the case remained a cold case. Then, more than a decade later, in January of 2021, a foreign male DNA profile was finally able to be constructed from the evidence left at the crime scene. Investigators ran the profile into CODES, but there was no match. In August 2021, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department homicide investigators contracted Texas DNA lab Othram Inc., a private Texas-based DNA laboratory, to perform advanced genetic testing on the suspect's DNA. This step was only possible due to a generous $5,000 donation from a Las Vegas philanthropist named Justin Wu. The lab was able to build a genealogical profile of the killer from just 15 human cells, which is the smallest amount of DNA ever used in a criminal case. The profile was then uploaded to the commercial DNA database and later to the family tree websites to find a possible match. After putting together all their findings, they contacted the LVMPD. They were hoping that this investigation would lead them back to the past, to one of the many possible suspects. To their shock, the evidence led them in a different direction entirely, to a man by the name of Johnny Blake Peterson, a name which had never come up on their radar in earlier investigations. Johnny Blake Peterson was born on September 12, 1960 in Las Vegas. He was one of several children and attended Western High School, the same school as Kim. Though he was not a student by the time Kim was murdered, the then 19-year-old Peterson was living in the same area. After graduation, he worked in the construction industry as a freelance plasterer. He married a woman named Cindy and had 2 children with her. At some point during his lifetime, he was arrested for the sexual assault of a woman, but it was unclear if he ever served time for this offense. Unfortunately, after all the twists and turns of this case, justice was never to prevail. On January 30th, 1993, Peterson was admitted to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada due to a drug overdose and died later that same day at the age of 33. In a press conference on November 29, 2021, investigators explained how they'd finally resolved the case after years of false leads and speculation. However, there was one last twist yet to come to light. As detectives were reviewing the cold cases in an attempt to ascertain whether Peterson was connected to any other crimes, they made an appalling discovery. The evidence connected him with another murder that occurred in 1983, nearly 5 years after Kim Bryant's slaying. 22-year-old Diana Hansen was reported missing by her parents after she failed to return home on December 31st, 1983. Her body was found later that day on Spring Mountain Road, approximately 1.5 miles southwest of Buffalo Drive. She'd been sexually assaulted and brutally murdered. DNA evidence was recovered from Diana's body, but no immediate suspect was identified. For the next 38 years, this case too remained cold. It was only when Peterson was identified as a killer in Kim Bryant's case that detectives compared his DNA with the DNA collected from Diana Hansen's body. That testing proved Johnny Blake Peterson was also responsible for Diana Hansen's death. It's truly frustrating that nearly 4 decades passed without the opportunity for the killer ever facing justice in a court of law. Hopefully, these families can finally find some solace knowing who took away their loved ones.
Woman has disappeared. She was visiting from China. One night she went for a walk and never came back. Her family made an emotional appeal today, and as Tim Weeks reports, police are searching for any sign of what's happened to her.
When a 47-year-old Chinese woman, Lianjie Guo, went missing from Vancouver, Canada during a vacation on June 7, 2012, her husband and young son were extremely worried. Not only did she have a flight to China the following day, but also she was unable to communicate in English. Did she get lost in a new country? Or had she fallen into someone's trap? Vancouver is a city unlike any other. Located in the lower mainland region of British Columbia, Vancouver is arguably the most beautiful city in the province with its majestic mountains, sparkling ocean, and rainforest greenery. Apart from its geographic aesthetic, Vancouver offers lucrative job opportunities and excellent education. Every year, many international students come to Vancouver to complete their studies. On June 8, 2012, the Vancouver Police Department in Canada received a desperate call from a 25-year-old Chinese exchange student, Yuan-Shi Tang. The caller said that his mother, 47-year-old Lianjie Guo, who was there visiting him, went missing just 1 day before she was supposed to return to her home country of China. She was particularly vulnerable because of her inability to speak or even understand English, her native tongue being Cantonese. Lianjie and her husband Tang Juihe went to Vancouver, Canada 20 days prior to visit her son, Yuan-Shi Tang, who was studying at Douglas College in Canada. They rented a B&B and made lots of plans for the three of them to spend time together as a family. Yuan was excited to show his parents around his new city. After a wonderful visit with their son, it was time for Tang Juihe and Lianjie to go back home. They had a flight scheduled to China on the afternoon of June 7, 2012. According to Yuan's statement, on the morning of their flight, Yuan made his way to the rented apartment to pick up his parents to go to the airport, but his father was still sleeping. As there was still plenty of time, Yuan decided to let him sleep in and took his mother for breakfast at a restaurant. After breakfast, they returned to the B&B, where he began loading all of their luggage into his car. He could see his mother watching him from the window as he was loading the luggage. He stated he then went to a nearby mall to make a purchase. But shockingly, when he returned, his mother was nowhere to be found. Yuan woke his father up to inquire about his mother's whereabouts. Initially, they weren't all that concerned. They assumed that Lianjie had just stepped outside for a minute and couldn't have been very far. After unsuccessfully trying to reach her by phone, they waited for some time, expecting her to come back. After a few hours, when she did not show up, they went to look for her. They searched around the city for quite some time with no luck. Since the flight was for that afternoon, Yuan and his father headed to the airport, thinking she may have caught a cab there. Unfortunately, she wasn't there either. As the airport announced the boarding of their flight, Tang Juihe was torn between going back home and searching for his wife. However, Yuan reassured him that it must have been a simple mix-up and that he'd be thoroughly searching for her and send her home once she was found. Tang Juihe returned home after a 13-hour flight filled with confusion and anxiety. His wife's seat beside him remained empty. Unable to find his mother, Yuan called the police the following morning. An investigation was launched immediately in an attempt to find Lianjie. When they reached the scene, they did not find anything suspicious. However, police speculated that Lianjie was trying to illegally stay in Canada and did not want to return home. However, this theory was filled with holes. Yuan's family ran a very successful furniture transport business, making them very well off. They had customers across the world, including the US, Europe, and Southeast Asia. While Tang Juihe visited his son often during business trips, Lianjie was visiting Vancouver for the first time. She had no history of any addiction, mental instability, affairs, or known enemies. There was really no reason for her to want to illegally stay in Canada. This theory was eventually thrown out when Lianjie's belongings, including her money, passport, and handbag, were discovered in Yuan's car. Fearing that she may have been abducted by someone, Yuan set out on a mission to find his mother. He handed out flyers with his mother's picture and details. He also gave interviews and held press conferences to spread awareness about his mother's disappearance in hopes of getting significant information. His father soon returned to Vancouver to assist in the investigation and search for his wife. The public, especially the Chinese community, was moved by the story of the father and son who were desperate to find their loved one. Many locals volunteered in the search efforts. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation, but for days, the search yielded no results. There were no ransom calls, which weakened the theory of kidnapping. At this point, when several days had passed with no new leads, cops were considering a much more sinister outcome. As a last resort, police began to look at this case from a different angle. They started looking closely at the family members. As they dug deeper, a strange piece of information caught their attention. Oddly, Yuan had rented an apartment in the same B&B in which his parents were staying, but failed to ever mention this to authorities. All this time, police believed Yuan was living in his own apartment and came to visit with his parents from time to time during their stay. Now it looked as though he was staying just next door to them the entire time. When police questioned Yuan regarding this, he simply said, "You didn't ask me, I didn't say." Upon further questioning as to why he rented a room in the B&B when he already had a rented apartment nearby, he justified it by saying he intended to spend as much time as possible with his parents. Although this bit of information did not prove that Yuan had anything to do with his mother's disappearance, his nonchalant attitude was enough to raise suspicion. Investigators also noticed that Yuan was also trying to downplay his English-speaking skills, avoiding some questions along the way, which also seems strange considering his 6 years of study in Canada. At this time, investigators started to look at Yuan as a person of interest. There was another anomaly in his story. He first told the police that his mother was alone and went missing from the B&B, but later changed his story and said they went to have breakfast and from there she went missing. He again changed his story later and said she was in his apartment and disappeared from there. Shocked by Yuan's lies, Tang Juihe asked him why he would do such a thing. Yuan told him that he did this to save his landlord from legal trouble, since his landlord illegally divided the rent and had done him a favor by not calling the cops into his apartment. Though the excuse sounded lame, Tang Juihe wanted to put all his efforts into finding his wife instead of arguing with his son. But police started digging deeper for clues. They interrogated the tenants in the B&B in Richmond, Vancouver, and they all said that the family got along really well. They hit a dead end, unable to gather any evidence. 2 weeks later, in a press conference, Tang Juihe and Yuan said that although they could not rule out the possibility that something bad had happened, they were hopeful that Lianjie was safe and sound and would be reunited with them soon. At that point, investigators were leaning toward homicide rather than a disappearance. With hopes of finding remains or any evidence, they beefed up their manpower and began sweeping the nearby wooded areas, but to no avail. Despite all efforts, there was practically no progress in the case. As the business back in China was falling apart, Tang Juihe had no option but to return home. Once again, he was relying on his son to keep the search for his mother alive, which Yuan promised him he would do, before persuading his father to go back. On July 20, 2012, Lianjie's case was formally handed over to Canada's Integrated Homicide Investigation Unit. Detectives from IHIU believed from the start that Lianjie's family members were involved in her disappearance and possible homicide. However, they were unsure whether it was Tang Juihe or Yuan Tang who was the culprit. Looking at the inconsistencies in Yuan's statements, IHIU detectives zeroed in on him. When they went to search the B&B, they found traces of blood on the ceiling, walls, closet, and nightstand in the room that Yuan was previously staying in. They also found a massive spot of dried blood on the bed. The blood was taken into the lab for testing, but couldn't be determined who it belonged to. As the blood evidence alone wasn't enough, Yuan couldn't be apprehended. Detectives also wanted to search Yuan's apartment, but they did not have enough to get a search warrant, and Yuan refused to let them in without one. July 20, 2012 marked 1.5 months from Lianjie's disappearance. On the same day, police received a call regarding the finding of a suitcase containing human remains on the beach near Harwood Island, a 6-hour drive from Vancouver. When cops reached the scene, they discovered the corpse of a middle-aged Asian woman. Looking at her clothes, police immediately thought of the missing Lianjie Guo. An autopsy later confirmed this. The results suggested that she died from multiple blows to her head. In her spine, 5 steel nails marked with Chinese words were found, which was consistent with the characteristics of Lianjie, as she had spinal surgery recently. When genetic tests were performed, the corpse was officially identified as 47-year-old Lianjie Guo. Unfortunately, there was no surveillance cameras in the areas where her body was found, and therefore no way to know who left the suitcase on the beach. Meanwhile, RCMP took over the case and strategized to go undercover. They neither went public with the discovery nor did they inform Yuan. At the start of August 2012, an undercover female police officer of Chinese descent contacted Yuan and said she had some information about his mother. The Cantonese-speaking officer met Yuan at a local Starbucks and informed him that she had found his mother's body inside a suitcase by the sea, but she hadn't informed the police. She was willing to get rid of it, if Yuan paid up. Although Yuan denied any connection to his mother's death and wanted to get away, the officer further insisted that she was going to give him 2 days to think about it. If not, she was going to the police. Yuan called her up that night to accede to her demands. In the next meeting, she introduced him to 2 more undercover cops who told him that getting rid of a body was easy enough for them, provided he gave them money. They claimed that one of their team members was dying from cancer and could be the fall guy if all the details of the murder were supplied to them. But Yuan had no money to give them, so he made a shocking proposal. He said if they killed his father, he'd inherit everything, and then he could pay them. The undercover cops agreed to his plan as well, but demanded to know the details. Yuan fell for this well-planned trap and began to tell them the entire story. Yuan was the only son of the couple, Tang Juihe and Lianjie Guo from Foshan. They ran a successful business with an annual turnover of 10 million yen. Lianjie's strong character was an asset to the business. However, she also had a need to control things, especially when it came to her son. She was what could be called a tiger mom. Every detail of Yuan's life, be it career planning or love life, was scrutinized by Lianjie. She was responsible for Yuan's breakup with his high school sweetheart, as she had an ordinary family background. Lianjie controlled the family's wealth, and she kept a tight rein on Yuan's pocket money. In 2006, then 19-year-old Yuan was sent to Canada by his parents against his will to pursue a higher education. He was to study hotel management at Douglas Community College so that he might build his own identity in Canada and extend the family business. Yuan felt lonely in a foreign country with no desire to pursue business and feeling oppressed by his mother's control. Yuan felt manipulated and coerced by their emotional abuse, and even his classmates complained about his mother. Yuan started lying to his parents, using various pretexts to obtain money, which he would spend on gambling or partying instead of studying for his degree. His grades were very poor and not suitable to pursue further education. To pay for his expenses, he worked part-time in the kitchen of a Chinese restaurant in Vancouver, despite having a student visa that did not allow him to work in Canada. He earned only $850 per month. Meanwhile, his family in China were completely unaware of his activities. In 2011, he returned to China to spend the holidays with his family. This time, he met a girl. In a very short time span, he proposed to her. His mother objected to the marriage and found a more suitable girl for him to marry, according to her standards. This upset him. After graduation, most of his classmates returned to China, and his circle of friends became smaller. He longed to return to China to reunite with his fiancée. He explained to his father that he felt imprisoned in Canada, but his father urged him to push further. His fiancée, meanwhile, became pregnant with what he believed was his child, but then underwent an abortion. This further pushed him toward the edge. In May of 2012, his parents visited him in Canada. He rented 2 B&B rooms in Richmond, one for himself and one for his parents. He explained that they could not stay at his place because it was a shared apartment. He also rented a car, claiming that he bought it. He showed his parents around Vancouver, but even then, tensions between them were building. He wanted to be free of them, free to do as he pleased with his life. At some point, Yuan found a hammer in the B&B toolbox and stashed it inside his backpack. On the morning of June 7th, upon realizing that his father had not yet woken up, Yuan spread some coins on his bed and called his mother to his room on the pretext of helping him clean it up. When Lianjie knelt to clean it, he hit her on the head with the hammer. When she started struggling, he covered her head with a sheet and struck twice more to ensure she was dead. After killing his mother, his mind raced. He wondered whether he should kill his father too. However, after a few minutes, he decided not to go through with it, fearing that suspicion could fall on him if the two of them disappeared at the same time. After convincing his father to return to China, Yuan returned to the B&B to clean up his mess. After getting rid of the evidence, it was time for Yuan to get into the role of the good son. Yuan put up the facade of a concerned son and reported her missing. After he was done telling his story to the undercover officers, he reenacted the whole incident, not knowing his performance was being recorded. His secret was about to blow up in his face. At this point, investigators had more evidence than they could have ever expected. Yet they decided to take it slow and gather more evidence against Yuan to corroborate his story. It did not take long to track down the rented car with traces of blood inside. They also found evidence of burn stains and blood from the storage room of Yuan's apartment. On September 7, 2012, Yuan Zhitang was formally arrested for the murder of his mother, exactly 3 months after her disappearance. In addition to the murder charge, he faced additional charges of plotting to kill his father. Although he tried to deny everything, he eventually confessed once all the evidence was presented before him, including the video evidence he had unknowingly given undercover agents. Life turned upside down for Tang Juihe in the blink of an eye when the news broke in China about Yuan's arrest, which prompted his immediate return to Canada. He couldn't believe that his son was capable of murdering his own mother. Yuan, on the other hand, showed no remorse. He went on to say that he had no regrets about what he did. "She's been holding me back, not just controlling me a little. These are my parents and will control me for life. People are going to die. It doesn't matter if it's sooner or later." It was later discovered that Yuan had been planning to kill his parents for a long time. He waited for them to come to Canada because this country had no death penalty. He was also skeptical if Canadian police would be capable enough to solve a crime so twisted. As it turned out, he overestimated his intellect as much as he underestimated Canadian law enforcement. Shockingly, despite Yuan's horrific deeds and plotting, Tang Juihe stood by his son during the trial. He not only forgave him, but invested a lot of his fortune in Yuan's legal aid. His reasoning? He already lost his wife and couldn't afford to lose his only son, too, despite all of his wrongdoings. In one of many jail visits with Yuan, he stated, "No matter how wrong you are, I will forgive you. Your mother is gone. If you die, I don't want to live." Somehow, Tang Juihe was certain that his wife would understand his reasoning while watching over them from heaven. In court, while testifying as a prosecution witness, he begged for leniency for his son, saying that Yuan was a good man before their strict parenting ruined everything. However, the court seemed to differ, as they found him guilty after a lengthy trial. Finally, on February 2, 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada handed down the sentence of life in prison to Lianjie Guo for the second-degree murder of his mother and attempted murder of his father, with parole eligibility after 17 years. This complex case of control and betrayal remains one of the most controversial and disheartening in recent Canadian history. In the end, the culprit faced justice, but a family was forever destroyed. When a stabbing took place in the early summer of 2003 in a quiet small town of Altrincham, Greater Manchester, England, police seemed to be on top of it. However, in a shocking turn of events, as the truth unfolded in this bizarre case, things were not at all what they seemed. This case is a prime example of how even the most seemingly straightforward cases can have the most shocking surprises in store. This goes to show that in the world of crime, truth is often stranger than fiction. But what really went down in this case? And what was the insane truth veiled under all the lies? Altrincham is a bustling town located in Greater Manchester, England. With a rich history dating back to the 13th century, the town has a mix of modern amenities and charming historical sites. Well known for its outdoor markets, Altrincham offers a range of handmade artistries and street food. The town center is filled with a variety of shops, cafes, and restaurants, making it a popular destination for visitors and locals alike. Altrincham is also home to several parks which are perfect for picnics and recreational activities. However, Altrincham is also the place where one of the strangest crimes in history took place. Just before 8 p.m. on Sunday, a scorching summer day of June 29, 2003, the police were called to an alley behind a row of shops in the Goose Green area in Altrincham, a town in Greater Manchester, England, where a stabbing had taken place. They arrived on the scene to see a 14-year-old teenager fighting for his life, bleeding to death after receiving multiple stab wounds. Standing close by was a 16-year-old boy who'd been the one who alerted the police to the crime. He introduced himself as a friend to the victim, who was at that point lying there in a pool of blood. For the sake of this story, we'll now refer to them as John, the 14-year-old victim, and Mark, the 16-year-old friend. Their real identities were never made public due to their young ages. John suffered 2 stab wounds, one in the chest, which was comparatively more shallow, and another in the abdomen, which was 6 inches deep. A large kitchen knife, covered in blood, was laying on the ground a few feet away from John. While John was on the brink of death, paramedics were fighting to keep him alive. Within minutes, he was taken to the Wythenshawe Hospital, while police commenced their search for answers. Police began the investigation by interviewing Mark, the only witness to the crime. Still sobbing and hysterical from what he'd just witnessed, the 16-year-old told police that he and John were walking down the alleyway of Goose Green sipping soft drinks from a nearby McDonald's when they were attacked by an unknown man. The man tried to grab John into the alley and stabbed John 2 times during this unprovoked attack before running off. Mark stood there watching and quivering in fear. Mark described the man to be possibly in his early 20s, wearing a black hoodie and black jeans with a baseball cap. John was admitted to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. The 6-inch stab wound in his abdomen pierced his kidney and liver. Blood pooled inside his body cavity, and this restricted the movement of his diaphragm, which stopped the functioning of his lungs. Surgeons were forced to remove his gallbladder. On the operation table, the boy's heart stopped 2 times. After barely escaping death, John thankfully survived the attack. But for days, he lay in a hospital bed, placed on a respirator, and carefully monitored. The community was shell-shocked in the wake of the incident. The alley of Goose Green where the stabbing occurred lay off Stamford New Road, close to a shopping mall in the prosperous Manchester suburb of Altrincham, where, other than an occasional shoplifting, crimes simply didn't occur. Naturally, the whole town went into panic mode, thinking that a predator was at large roaming around the town in search of young children. The stabbings were also heavily publicized in the local media. Police shared the description of the attacker and urged the public to provide any significant information they might have. Multiple newspapers were reporting the alleged sightings of a man who fit the description of the assailant. However, nothing came of these alleged sightings. Investigators were concerned that with no clue to suggest the motive for the attack, the assailant might strike again. Even with all these concerns, the investigation was like any other. Investigators knew that they needed more evidence than the vague description of the man. While still appealing for witnesses to contact them, authorities seized hours of CCTV footage of the surrounding area, hoping that a camera would have caught a glimpse of the hooded knifeman. Luckily for them, one closed-circuit camera at the base of the alley had recorded all the foot traffic, including the 2 boys. In the footage, the 2 boys were seen going into the alleyway 25 minutes earlier than the alleged stabbing. Although the actual stabbing was not captured, both Mark and John were seen most of the time. Shockingly, they found out that no hooded man ever entered the alleyway. It was at this point that the seemingly straightforward case became one of the most unusual cases to go down in history. Within 10 days of the incident, the case had taken a complete turn. The suspicion was now on Mark, the 16-year-old boy who was initially considered the lone witness of this horrific stabbing. It was apparent to the investigators that John was not stabbed by any hooded knifeman, but by his own friend, Mark. But there were more questions than answers. Why would he attack his friend? When Mark was confronted by the investigators with the CCTV footage, he changed his story and admitted to stabbing his friend. But no one could have anticipated what he told them next. He claimed that he'd been recruited by a supposed British agent who worked for the Secret Service. This supposed agent persuaded Mark to kill his friend over an internet chat room. He'd been given detailed instructions on how to commit the crime. Additionally, he was also promised that he'd be recruited into the British Secret Service and be able to meet the Prime Minister, along with being given a gun and up to £500,000 in cash. Investigators did not believe Mark was telling the truth. They rather assumed that he was making up the story to get suspicion off him. They seized his computer and made another startling discovery. When investigators seized Mark's computer, they found 58,000 lines of text within the chat room. Investigators realized that, absurd as it sounded, Mark really was telling the truth this time. However, investigators were still trying to piece together this strange puzzle. They decided to dig deeper into Mark's life. Mark lived a perfectly normal life for the most part. He belonged to a respectful working-class family in Stockport, Manchester, and he was quite close with his parents. In school, he did reasonably well in academics, but he excelled in sports. He was also known as a likable and popular guy. According to his school records, he'd never been in any trouble. At 16, he was in college, which is normal in the UK, and also worked part-time in a restaurant. Like most 16-year-olds at the time, Mark spent time on his computer and often logged into internet chat rooms. Mark had no idea that his life was about to take a dark turn when, just 6 months before the stabbing, he discovered a chat room dedicated to Manchester teenagers. Like many others, this popular MSN chat room also provided features where users could make friends, chat, post pictures, share interests and gossip, and also see others via webcam if they wished to. Mark was using the chat room to make friends and meet girls in the Manchester area. It did not take long for Mark to get addicted to these chats, and he began to spend hours on his computer. It was here that Mark met his victim, John. Among many in the chat room, Mark set his eyes on one girl who went by Rachel. She described herself as a 16-year-old who worked in a local gym. After 2 days of conversation, Rachel introduced her 14-year-old stepbrother, John, to Mark. The trio stayed in touch over the chat room for the next 3 months and talked about their similar interests, such as football, films, relationships. While Mark and John were becoming best friends, Mark was falling in love with Rachel, and apparently she reciprocated his feelings. They seemed to be having a whirlwind romance based solely on the chat room itself, since Rachel claimed she did not have a webcam. Despite the pair's numerous plans to meet in person, they never laid eyes on each other as excuses piled up from Rachel's side. Yet Mark did not seem to mind and even professed his love for Rachel in the chat room. While Mark was naive enough to embrace the internet world as his own, the last thing we want is our personal information getting leaked on the internet, which is why we're proud to partner with Atlas VPN. It's a tool that hides and encrypts your virtual location, so you can surf the web with peace of mind knowing that your online identity is protected. Plus, with Atlas VPN's lightning-fast speeds, you don't have to worry about buffering or lag. Right now, Atlas VPN is giving a huge discount. With only $1.83 per month subscription, you can get 3 months extra and a 30-day money-back guarantee. This tool also blocks all junk links and ads we're desperate to get rid of. But the best part of Atlas VPN is that it unlocks the content of other regions on streaming platforms such as Netflix, HBO, etc., which would otherwise have license and location restrictions on them with just one subscription. Go to the link in the description box for 3 months extra and a 30-day money-back guarantee on a $1.83 per month subscription. Don't miss out on the opportunity as it's a limited time offer. 3 months before the stabbing, a new person entered the chat room, as well as Mark's virtual life too. The person, who went by Kevin, openly introduced himself to the chat room as a gay stalker who had a foot fetish. Nobody in the chat room took him seriously until he made a shocking claim. He emailed Mark saying that he kidnapped his virtual girlfriend, Rachel. Kevin further claimed that she'd be released on one condition: if Mark agreed to masturbate on a webcam while showing his feet. Strangely, it did not set off alarm bells for Mark, and instead of going to the authorities, he readily agreed to Kevin's demands. After this, Kevin announced that he'd released Rachel, and for a brief time, she returned to the chat room. But after a few days, Rachel stopped communicating altogether. Eventually, Mark was told by Kevin that Rachel was once again kidnapped and, this time, murdered. Even then, Mark stayed quiet and never called the police. Despite claiming to be very distraught over Rachel's death, Mark continued using the chat room. In fact, it was after Rachel's supposed death that Mark and John's friendship strengthened. While Mark never got to meet Rachel, he was hanging out with John outside of the chat room. Even with the age difference between the two boys, they were fast becoming best friends. Just a few weeks after Rachel's demise, Mark found interest in another teenage girl who introduced herself as Lianjie East. Their conversation began as casual at first, but soon shared intimate details with each other. The situation got weirder when Lianjie confessed to Mark that she was part of a junior Secret Service agent for the British Intelligence Service, commonly known as MI6. She further revealed that she only joined this MSN chat room with the purpose of tracking down Kevin, Rachel's supposed killer, who was now targeting her stepbrother, John. John, who was unaware of the situation, was supposedly under government protection. Lianjie also claimed that she was hoping that Mark would help her in her mission. Immediately after this conversation, Mark did not hear from Lianjie for days. Then a post-dated email was sent to Mark, which Lianjie had arranged in case she was killed in action. In the email, Lianjie requested that Mark complete her unfinished work of protecting John. It was another sad end in Mark's online love life, But the strange twists certainly did not stop here. In an unbelievable turn of events, at the end of April 2003, Rachel reappeared in the chat room. Though Mark was happy to hear she was alive, he was stunned at the same time. However, he quickly realized that there was something wrong with Rachel's story. Rachel claimed to have been held captive while being in a coma. It's not clear how much of this story Mark believed, but Rachel soon disappeared from the chat room for a final time. Even with all these far-fetched stories, Mark kept going back to the chat room and following his usual routine. He then found himself engaged in a conversation with someone who went by the name Janet Dobinson. However, unlike the previous instances, this time the woman was not a teenager. She introduced herself as a 44-year-old attractive married woman living with her husband and 2 children. To the outside world, she was a real estate agent. However, she revealed to Mark that she really worked as a spy for the British Secret Service, similar to Lindsay, but in a much higher position. In fact, she claimed to be the 3rd most powerful woman in England. Always writing in capital letters, Janet made her intentions very clear from the start, that she was not there for any adolescent conversations, but to recruit a teenager in the Secret Service. In her words, Mark perfectly fit the description for that role. But as per her demands, Mark needed to prove his worthiness and loyalty before he could be taken to London for his MI6 training. Although Mark was skeptical of the job, he could not refuse such a lucrative offer and went along with Janet's game plan. Janet told Mark that as a part of his initiation process in the MI6, he was required to secretly work as a bodyguard for Manchester teen and a fellow MI6 operative, James Bell. He was instructed by Janet that James should never know that Mark had been tasked with keeping an eye on him. Being a James Bond fan himself, Mark was delighted to work as a part of MI6, but he was still curious to know what made James so important. To answer that, Janet told him an elaborate story about a secret safe hidden at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean that only a few countries knew about, but only the Queen of England had the combination to open. Since the Queen was not physically capable of opening the safe, she entrusted the codes to only one other person, and that person was James Bell. However, Mark was about to get yet another shock. He soon learned that James Bell was none other than his best friend, John. Even after this shocking revelation, Mark did not say anything to John. Instead, he started to spend more time with them in order to fulfill his duties. They were even having sleepovers more often. Meanwhile, Mark reported all his actions to Janet back in the chat room, and she was satisfied with his progress. Mark's next assignment was to get John out of the school without raising suspicion, and he was able to complete that task as well. Within a few days, Janet was ready with another assignment for Mark. His last task before being officially recruited by the MI6 was very odd. He was told to have an encounter to make John look gay. However, Janet refused to elaborate on this plot, but warned him that his failure might affect national security, as well as losing her job. Soon after, Mark told Janet that he and John had watched pornography together. He was overjoyed when Janet informed him that he'd been officially appointed as a spy. However, his first mission was nothing he could have ever expected. Janet ordered Mark to kill John. The same John she'd instructed Mark to protect all this time. His best friend. Mark could not believe it. At first he considered that Janet might be testing him, but she was adamant that the country was depending on him. She said that John was planning a school shooting or something similar to that, which made it necessary for the British government to get rid of him. When Mark protested that he didn't want to murder his best friend, Janet reassured him, saying that it wouldn't be murder in John's case. Janet told Mark that John was suffering from a terminal illness and killing him would be a mere mercy killing. As a reward for the successful completion of Mark's assignment, Janet promised him that he'd receive £80 million in cash, meet the then PM Tony Blair, the Queen, and receive sexual favors from Janet herself. Mark even had been given a code name, 47695, as well as an abort code, 6969, in case the mission was to be cancelled. Janet even went on to outline specific instructions regarding what kind of knife Mark should use, what boots to wear, and the location where he was to carry out his mission. Although Mark agreed to do the job, he still had his doubts. Yet a few days later, John confided in Mark, revealing he had a brain tumor, which cemented Mark's faith in Janet's credibility. Indeed, on the evening of June 29, 2003, Mark carried out this preposterous plan. Mark and John spent the entire day together. He even bought a 6-inch long knife while the pair were out shopping. When John asked Mark about the knife, he lied, saying that it was a gift for his mother. It was getting dark when Mark and John entered Goose Green Alley. In this alleyway, far away from surveillance footage, Mark stabbed his friend, once in the chest and once in the stomach. Following Janet's orders, he waited 20 minutes before calling an ambulance. Janet never showed up as she'd previously promised. When the police arrived, Mark hastily made up the story about the hooded knifeman. When John regained consciousness, investigators questioned him. He initially confirmed Mark's claims about a stranger attacking them in the alley, telling police that he also did not know the identity of the knife-holding assailant. Once confronted with Mark's confession, John admitted it was his best friend Mark who had stabbed him, but he could not give any explanation as to why the attack had happened. Nevertheless, Mark was arrested in July 2003 and detained in a juvenile detention center on the charge of attempted murder. He could not understand why Janet had not come to his rescue. Police, however, assumed there was possibly a pedophile, or even a group of pedophiles, behind the online persona of the mysterious spy mistress, and investigators turned to the task of trying to find the true identity behind Janet Dobinson. Although the hunt for the true identity of Janet Dobinson was immediately launched, it would take 3 months before police even began to unravel the truth. The amount of material discovered on Mark's computer was staggering. Criminal intelligence analyst Sally Hogg was given the task of analyzing the staggering 58,000 lines of text recovered from Mark's computer. Sally discovered that in addition to Rachel, Kevin, Lindsay, and Janet, Mark regularly chatted with many other profiles over the chat room whom he never even met in real life. As she began to dig deeper, she discovered a web of lies and deceit that went far beyond anyone's imagination. After initially believing that all the personas were different people, however, in a shocking turn of events, investigators discovered that nothing was what it seemed to be. The twist in this case was so unexpected and surreal that it left everyone speechless. Sally Hogg was shocked to learn that all the profiles were linked to one individual. It was a carefully constructed virtual universe, placing Mark in the center. And the orchestrator of this game was none other than John himself. Unlike Mark, John did not grow up in a home filled with love and laughter. While he lived with his mother, he had no recollection of his biological father, who apparently attempted to abduct him as a child. He grew up believing one of his stepfathers to be his real father before inadvertently discovering the truth. His drug-addicted stepfather left the family when John was only 7. As a child, he often watched his mother weeping at home, and then when he went to school, he was tormented by bullies. From a young age, these incidents took a toll on his mental health. Despite earning excellent grades in school, he was aloof and withdrawn. When John was 11, his mother settled down with a man after multiple failed relationships. Unfortunately, John's relationship with his new stepfather was not good. This, with the added struggle of his sexual orientation, sent him into a state of deep depression. So when his mother gifted him a computer to help him with his schoolwork on his 13th birthday, John turned to the internet to escape his real-life struggles and entered into a world of fantasy. Perhaps fantasy was the only thing John wanted to explore by pretending to be dozens of characters in the chat room. He took solace in the fact that, in his virtual world, he could be anyone he wanted to be. By February 2003, John was contacting 20 to 30 people a night in MSN chat rooms, and within a week, he stumbled upon Mark. Once John had introduced himself as Rachel's brother, the two boys just clicked. As they bonded over the interests they commonly shared, John became obsessed with Mark. Fearing that Mark would soon abandon him after Rachel's demise, John created other personas and an elaborate web of deceit in order to keep Mark interested in him. The trick worked when Mark spent time with them as a part of the assignment for the British Secret Service. But his joy did not last long, as John realized the virtual universe John had so carefully constructed was fast slipping out of control. Whether the 14-year-old boy felt it would be impossible to get out from under all the lies he told, or he truly did not want to continue with his life, was never revealed. However, John was pulling the strings of his own murder behind the curtains, while Mark played the role of a puppet, which ended up in a horrific mess. At the end of May 2004, the two boys ended up in court, where neither boy so much as glanced at the other. During the trial, when the mystery was unveiled, Mark said that he could not believe he'd been so gullible, while John never said a word. Mark pleaded guilty to attempted murder and was sentenced to a 2-year supervision order. John eventually pleaded guilty to inciting his own murder, being the only person in British history to be charged with that offense. John was also charged with perverting the course of justice and sentenced to a 3-year supervision order, during which time he was not allowed to enter chat rooms or use the internet unsupervised. The two boys are never allowed to contact each other again. Judge David Madison noted that skilled writers would struggle to conjure up a plot such as that which arises here. The judge further added that under normal circumstances, the crimes would have resulted in extremely lengthy jail sentences. However, the circumstances could not be described as such, and he believed time in prison would not be beneficial to either boy. As of now, Mark would be 32 and John 30. Their true identities are forever protected. The twist in this case was so unexpected and surreal that it left everyone speechless. It's one of those rare cases that makes you question everything you thought you knew about human nature. Have you ever heard a more puzzling story than this? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping true crime stories.